Hey there, welcome in. Tonight, we're stepping past the drawbridge and into the heart of a medieval castle. Not the one from bedtime stories, but the real one. Cold stone underfoot, smoke in the air, the echo of boots on flagstones, and whispers behind wooden doors. Castles weren't just places of pageantry and power, they were machines built to survive war, hunger, and time. But inside those walls, life was anything but noble. This isn't a story of royalty. It's the story of the ones who froze, starved, scrubbed, and served beneath the tapestries. The ones history forgot, but the stones remember. If you enjoy these darker, more grounded windows into the past, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you want to keep exploring these corners with me. And let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Now settle in, let the night wrap around you. It's time to walk through the gates and see what's really behind the castle walls. Every movie, storybook, and tourist guide has sold you a fantasy. Tall towers glowing in the golden sunrise, noble lords drinking wine beside roaring hearths, banners fluttering over walls of honor and grandeur. They made it sound romantic, almost magical. But now you're here, inside one of these so-called marvels of the medieval world, and the illusion cracks with every breath you take. The first thing that hits you isn't the majesty, it's the cold. Not just cold as in bundle up, cold. It's the kind that lives in the walls, seeps into your marrow, and clings to your skin no matter how many layers you wear. The walls aren't smooth, elegant limestone. They're rough, damp, and oozing with moisture from decades or centuries of unbothered rot. The castle doesn't smell like history or glory. It smells like mold, old straw, and the unmistakable stench of people forced to live far too close together without a bath. The floor beneath your feet is not marble. It's packed earth or uneven stone, slick with condensation, sometimes even frozen in patches. If you think that's bad, try sleeping here. Beds are for nobles, and even theirs are stiff wooden platforms with worm-ridden mattresses stuffed with musty straw. If you're a servant, you're lucky to get the floor near the hearth, and only if someone higher up hasn't claimed it. The rest of you huddle in corners like livestock, wrapped in rags that scratch more than they warm. You pull your cloak tighter, but the air slips in anyway, ghosting across your neck like it knows you can't fight back. That's the real heart of castle life. Discomfort as law, suffering as routine, endurance as your only virtue. The noise never stops. Echoes bounce through the stone halls, amplified by the arched ceilings and unsealed doors. You can hear every grunt, every cough, every shuffle of boots from one end of the corridor to the other. Privacy is a fantasy. You don't speak secrets in castles. You breathe them out and hope they drown in the draft. And the draft is always there. Every crack in the wall, every gap in the window, every slit in the stonework designed for archers or airflow is just another doorway for the wind to enter and chill you until your bones ache. You're not indoors. You're just out of the rain. And even that's not a guarantee. Forget peace. Forget warmth. Forget nobility. The medieval castle is not a palace. It's a fortress, built for war, not for comfort. Every stone was stacked with defense in mind, not your sleep schedule. You're not protected. You're imprisoned. The lords may dine in the hall above, but down here, in the guts of this damp stone beast, you're just meat that moves, a soul wrapped in chapped skin and cold breath. You thought you'd find a home within these walls. What you've found is a cage. A beautiful one, perhaps, but a cage all the same. Welcome to the castle. You'll be cold forever. There's cold, and then there's castle cold. It's not the kind that makes you shiver for a moment. and then pull up your collar. It's the kind that crawls under your skin and settles into your joints like a second skeleton. The walls aren't just stone, they're reservoirs of winter, soaking up the chill and bleeding it back into the room day and night. And these aren't rooms made with insulation or warmth in mind. They're hollow vaults of echoing misery, barely lit and barely sealed, where wind and frost drift through cracks like uninvited ghosts. At first, you think you'll adjust. Maybe a few more layers, maybe huddle near the fire. But fires are rare commodities here. Wood is expensive, smoke chokes the air, and the hearth, if you're even near one, only warms a few feet in any direction. You quickly learn that in castle life, warmth is not a birthright, it's a battlefield, and you're already losing. Sleeping offers no relief. The straw-stuffed mattress beneath you is damp more often than not, the fabric rough and stinking of mold and sweat. You curl into yourself, trying to find a pocket of your own heat, but the air presses in, wet, heavy, clinging. Breath clouds the air like you're outdoors, and the only thing thinner than the blanket across your back is the illusion that you'll ever get comfortable. Even the nobility aren't spared entirely. Their beds may be larger, their drapery finer, but the walls are the same, and the stone doesn't care about titles. They too wake with frozen toes and stiff fingers, cursing the design of a fortress that defends against sieges, but not against the bite of a hard winter morning. Morning doesn't bring warmth, just movement. Your limbs are stiff, your breath still visible, and the clothes you pull on are as cold as the floor. Washing? Don't count on it. The water in the basin has a thin sheet of ice, and touching it feels like plunging your hands into death itself. You splash anyway, because you're expected to be clean, or at least presentable. You do it fast, wincing, teeth clenched, and dry your hands on fabric that feels like wet parchment. Outside the window, the world is white with frost, but inside, it's the same colorless misery. The cold never left. It just stopped pretending it might. You think back to stories told around hearths in warmer places, about the grand halls, the roaring fires, the coziness of castle life. You laugh bitterly. There's no warmth here. Not from the stones, not from the air, not from the people who shuffle through the halls wrapped in cloaks like the walking dead. Comfort isn't part of the equation. It's not even a memory. This is where warmth goes to die, and where you, wrapped in every scrap of fabric you own, start to wonder if it'll ever return. In a castle, winter isn't a season. It's a way of life. You've had bad bathroom experiences, sure, but nothing can prepare you for the medieval castle privy. The word alone, guardrobe, sounds quaint, almost noble. Don't be fooled. It's a hole in the wall. A stone shaft suspended over a cesspit, sometimes shared by multiple floors of the castle, sometimes just emptying into the moat below. And the smell? It doesn't waft. It attacks. It clings. It invades your nostrils, your clothes, your soul. The first time you lift the wooden seat, if there is one, you don't just recoil. You question your will to live. Because the castle toilet isn't just an inconvenience. It's an ordeal. One that begins with the gut-dropping dread of proximity and ends with the silent prayer that you make it out alive without slipping, gagging, or falling in. There is no privacy, no comfort, just a freezing stone cubicle, often open to the air, wind slicing through the gap beneath you, where you squat in your layers of wool and linen, trying not to think about what's directly beneath your exposed flesh. No paper, no soap, no water basin. Maybe, if you're lucky, a pile of moss or straw or scrap cloth. But even that's rare. Most people wipe with whatever they can find, a smooth stick, a handful of hay, or nothing at all. And if you think that's rough, imagine emptying the thing. Someone, likely a lowly servant or night soil man, has to go down into the pit and shovel it out by hand. There are records of these poor souls literally drowning in their work, death by filth, in the shadow of stone and nobility. The worst part is that the smell doesn't stay in the privy. It leaks. It seeps through walls and floors, especially in warm weather. Some castles tried to position guard robes away from the main chambers, but architecture wasn't always so thoughtful. You might be dining in the great hall while the stench of human waste wafts through the cracks from a shaft 2 levels up. And that's the lords and ladies. Imagine the servants. No assigned chamber pot. No time to make the trip to the guard robe. You go where you can, into a corner, into a jar, onto the straw. Then you carry it out, or you don't. And the smell grows. You hear legends about lavender-scented linens, flower-strewn floors, perfumed nobility. But inside these walls, those things are armor. They're not for luxury. They're for defense. Against the air, against disease, against a daily existence steeped in human waste. The castle may have been a fortress against outsiders, but it had no defenses against its own stink. And you live in it, day after day, nostrils numb, dignity eroded, wishing for just one breath of clean air. The guard robe isn't just a toilet, it's a reminder that no matter how high the tower, how grand the banquet, every castle has a pit full of human rot beneath it. And eventually, the smell always rises. If you think medieval kitchens were cozy hearths with bubbling pots and cheerful cooks, think again. The castle kitchen was a battlefield, between flame and flesh, ash and air, chaos and hunger. Step inside, and the first thing you notice isn't the food, it's the smoke. Thick, greasy, and ever-present, it hangs in the air like a punishment, turning every breath into a coughing fit and leaving your eyes in a constant state of sting. Chimneys? Rarely effective. Windows? If there are any, they're narrow slits. The fire, an open blaze as wide as a wagon, is fed constantly with logs soaked in sap, often damp from storage, spitting embers and blackening everything it touches, including you. Within an hour, you're soaked with sweat, covered in soot, and wondering if lungs can be cooked from the inside. The air isn't just smoky, it's alive. Flies swarm every surface. Rats skitter underfoot. The meat you're roasting is questionable at best, already starting to sour if the weather's wrong, which it usually is. Refrigeration doesn't exist. Preservation is guesswork. Salting, drying, smoking, but there's no standard, no safety check, no second chances. Bread often contains bits of stone from the mill, which wears down your teeth as surely as time itself. And yet, if the bread burns or the stew spoils, it's not a kitchen mishap. It's your fault. And if you're cooking for nobility, your mistakes can cost more than your pride. They can cost your life. Serving spoiled meat to a lord isn't just an accident. It's an insult. One that might end with you whipped, exiled, or worse. Burns are part of the uniform. Everyone in the kitchen has scars on their arms, their faces, their hands. You dodge boiling pots, sizzling pans, and spitfires that roar without warning. There are no mitts, no timers, just instinct and tolerance. The floors are always slick with grease or water or blood. Someone is always screaming because a pig kicked over a pot, or a scullion slipped, or the roast's gone black and the feast is ruined. You work fast and you work blind, half choked and half dazed, because the demands never stop. The Lord wants dinner, the soldiers want stew, the servants want scraps. And everything, every single dish, has to be ready at once. Forget recipes, measurements, clean hands. The kitchen isn't a place of control, it's survival dressed up as hospitality. You use what's available, season with guesswork, and hope the food isn't rotten enough to send someone running to a monk with a stomach complaint. And if someone dies, maybe it was the fish, maybe it was the berries, maybe it was the gods. Blame is flexible, punishment is not. So you stir, you cough, you sweat. You dodge blades and boiling broth, all for the joy of being the invisible force behind a feast that won't feed you properly. The kitchen isn't a place of creativity or warmth. It's a furnace of obligation, a crucible of constant danger, and a reminder that in the castle food chain, you're just one mistake away from becoming meat yourself. You don't wake up refreshed in a medieval castle. You wake up sore, stiff, itchy. The first thing your body tells you, before your eyes even open, is that something hurts. Maybe it's your lower back, twisted all night on a straw mat, thinned by years of use, and flattened into the texture of a floorboard. Maybe it's your neck, bent sideways by the awkward slope of your bedmate's shoulder, or your shoulder pressed against stone so cold it aches. Or maybe it's the more familiar pain, the crawling, stinging reminder that the fleas have returned, and they've brought company. Again. There is no bed of your own unless you're someone important. Most people, servants, guards, children, workers, sleep crammed together like salted fish. Privacy is a myth. Personal space is a joke. You sleep inches away from other bodies, all of them sweating, farting, snoring, coughing. Someone inevitably rolls over and elbows you in the ribs. Someone talks in their sleep. Someone gets up to relieve themselves in the corner. You try to ignore it. You fail. There are no separate bedrooms, no doors to close, just bodies, breath, and the collective stench of people who haven't bathed in days, maybe weeks. The room is cold, always. Even in summer, the stone sucks the warmth from the air and replaces it with a dampness that settles in your bones. In winter, it's worse. You huddle beneath a rough wool blanket, if you have one, shivering despite the shared body heat, your breath fogging in front of your face. You try to curl tighter, but the straw beneath you is full of grit, bugs, and the lingering scent of every person who's used it before, which in some cases is half the castle. Noise never stops. There's the wind outside, moaning through gaps in the walls. There are the rats, scratching in the rafters. The occasional clang from the courtyard as a night watchman stumbles past. And inside, snoring, shuffling, muffled weeping. A child having a nightmare. Someone shifting and muttering a prayer. It's a symphony of exhaustion, played nightly and never well. You fall asleep to it eventually, more out of desperation than peace. And when you wake, it hasn't stopped. It never stops. Even nobility doesn't fare much better. Sure, they have a bed frame, maybe a feather mattress, certainly curtains. But their chambers are drafty, their bedding moldy, and their servants noisier than they realize. Rich or poor, castle sleep is not restorative. It's damage control. You don't rest. You pause. You close your eyes knowing that in a few hours, you'll be up again, hauling, cooking, guarding, praying, or serving. There is no such thing as a restful night, just a temporary escape from misery with a rude awakening built in. And when morning comes, you rise slower than you used to. You stretch and wince and scratch. You wonder if the aches in your joints are from the cold, or from sleeping twisted against a wall, or just from existing. It doesn't matter. You're up now, tired, already tired, and the day hasn't even started. You don't wake up to the smell of sizzling bacon or the comfort of a warm drink in a medieval castle. You wake up to hunger that feels like an injury, and breakfast, if you can call it that, is no cure. The first meal of the day isn't soft. It isn't warm. It doesn't greet you like a kindness. It meets you like a slap, usually in the form of bread. Not the fluffy golden loaf your imagination has stolen from modern ovens, but a dense, rock-hard lump of emmer or barley, dark with age and stiff with sand. Yes, sand. Every bite is an assault on your teeth, scraping your gums, grinding enamel down to nothing. By the time you're 30, if you still have teeth, they're likely cracked, worn flat, or infected. That pain in your jaw? It's not going away. The bread is days old, weeks even, if the supply is bad. Baked in communal ovens long before dawn. Stored in damp corners, sometimes dropped, always handled by a dozen filthy hands. If it's soft at all, it's because it started to mold. If it's not moldy, it's dry enough to hammer nails with. You might soak it in ale to soften it, but that's a trick that barely works. And the ale? It's warm, cloudy, and sour. Not the crisp, cold brew of fantasy, but a thick liquid that tastes like someone stored grain porridge in a sweaty boot. It's low in alcohol, yes, but high in sediment. You sip it not for flavor, but because it's safer than the water, which could kill you outright. If you're lucky, there's an onion. Not a plate of sliced onion, just the whole thing, sharp and raw, maybe softened by a few days rolling around the pantry floor. You bite it like an apple, tears instantly stinging your eyes, the acid burning your tongue. Maybe there's cheese, hard, salty, and sweating with age. Maybe a bit of pork fat or lard, smeared on stale bread like a desperate man's butter. These are not guaranteed. These are not treats. These are leftovers from last week's butcherings, gnawed on by mice if you didn't hide them well. Breakfast is not a gathering. It's not a calm start to the day. It's a frantic moment of shoving food into your mouth before the steward starts shouting or the bell tolls for labor. You eat squatting, hunched, or standing. You eat with your hands, fingers crusted from the same mat you slept on. You eat quickly, not to enjoy, but to end it. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve and move on. There is no comfort, no ease, just hard bread, bad ale, and the grim knowledge that this meal, brutal as it is, might be the most substantial thing you get all day. Because when you live in a medieval castle, breakfast isn't nourishment. It's a bruise, a dry, splintered promise that the rest of the day will hurt more. Serving in a medieval castle meant existing in a state of permanent exhaustion, but never quite enough to stop moving. From the moment your eyes opened in the freezing dark to the last echo of footsteps in the corridor before midnight, your life belonged to someone else. You didn't work in the castle. You were part of it, another mechanism in its grim machinery, no more valuable than a broom or a bucket unless you stopped working. Then you became a problem, or a warning. There were no weekends, no holidays unless the church said so, and even then, you spent most of them preparing for someone else's celebration. If you were a scullion, you scrubbed greasy pans until your fingernails bled. If you were a chambermaid, you scraped filth from bedpans and dragged your aching feet up endless spiral staircases to change lice-infested sheets that smelled like rot and sweat. If you were a boy in the stables, you shoveled dung for horses that got more oats than you got bread, and you did it all silently. Gratitude wasn't part of your Lord's vocabulary. Fear was your second shadow. Not the loud, screaming kind, but the quiet, ever-present dread that came from knowing your fate could shift with a mood. You might be slapped for spilling wine, beaten for missing a chore, or dismissed for something as trivial as making eye contact at the wrong time. If you were dismissed, you didn't go down the road to find new work. You starved, you wandered, you died in a ditch. The castle wasn't just your prison, it was your lifeline. And no one reminded you of that more than the people in charge. Your lord didn't know your name. He didn't care how long you'd served or how hard you worked or how many fingers you'd smashed under a stone plate trying to set the feast. You weren't a person to him. You were a role, a tool. Your success was invisible. Your failure, a spectacle. The closer you worked to nobility, the more invisible you became. If a noble tripped on a loose rush mat, it was your fault. If their food was cold, if their linens were rough, if their dog barked once too many times, it was your fault. And you apologized for it, over and over, because not apologizing was worse. There were moments, fleeting ones, when you might catch your breath. A stolen hunk of cheese, a quiet laugh shared in the servants' quarters, a candle stub left burning after curfew. But even these were risks. Because if you laughed too loudly or lingered too long, someone would remind you that comfort wasn't part of your job. Life beneath the lords wasn't about earning your keep. It was about proving every day that you deserved to keep it. There was no ladder, no reward, just another morning, another task, another chance to avoid punishment, and another night praying the straw mat felt a little less like stone. When people imagine meals in a medieval castle, they picture roaring hearths, overflowing platters, and a boisterous hall echoing with laughter and music. They see nobles gnawing on drumsticks, wine spilling from golden goblets, and servants bustling around like choreographed dancers. But for anyone not born into wealth or title, mealtime was not a celebration. It was a gauntlet, a daily reminder of where you stood in the food chain, somewhere between the hounds and the scraps they left behind. The great hall was vast, cold, and echoing, its stone walls more suited to containing noise than comfort. A long, raised dais at the far end held the high table, where the lord, his family, and favored guests dined with pomp and plenty. They had cushions, cloth napkins, pewter dishes, even spices. You, on the other hand, sat on a bench, if you were lucky, pressed shoulder to shoulder with other servants, squires, guards, and dependents. Your table was lower, your food was colder, and by the time it reached you, it was often less meal and more leftover. The food came down in order of importance. Dishes were first presented to the lord, often in elaborate style, roast meats glazed with honey, pastries molded into animal shapes, jellied fish, and rich pottage flavored with imported spices. The servants at the high table picked clean the best of it before anything trickled down. By the time the trencher, a stale slab of bread used as a makeshift plate, reached your end of the hall, it was often soaked through, torn apart, and barely edible. You were expected to be grateful. Even when chewing through it felt like trying to eat a sponge left in the fireplace. There was no guaranteed portion. No one counted the loaves or measured the stew. You grabbed what you could, when you could, and ate fast, because if you didn't, someone else would take it from you. Elbows were weapons. Speed was survival. Bread crusts became currency, traded in whispers between those who hadn't had a proper meal in days. Meat was rare, unless you were part of a noble's hunting party, and even then, your reward might be the organs or gristle no one else wanted. You didn't speak during meals unless spoken to. You didn't ask for more. You didn't complain. And if a noble sneezed in the direction of the food or knocked a platter onto the floor, it wasn't wasted. It was repurposed, often right into your bowl. Hygiene wasn't a concern. Clean hands were optional. Rats ran beneath the benches, and dogs circled constantly, ready to dart in for a dropped morsel. You and the animals were on equal footing. except they were sometimes petted. When the meal ended, you didn't linger. You cleared dishes, swept rushes, scraped bones, and wiped grease off the trestle boards with the same cloth you used for your face. There were no after-dinner stories, no dessert, no moment to savor, just the tightening knowledge that this, pitiful as it was, might be your only full belly for the day. The Great Hall was a theater of hunger. It looked like abundance, but only if you stood on the stage. From the pit where you lived, it was something else entirely, a contest of speed, silence, and low expectations, and losing meant more than hunger. It meant invisibility. Putting on clothes in a medieval castle wasn't about expressing personality or embracing comfort. It was about survival, and even then, barely. Fashion, for most, wasn't a luxury or an indulgence. It was a burden, both literally and figuratively. Your garments were assigned to you by necessity, dictated by status, availability, and the harsh demands of the climate. You didn't choose your outfit. You submitted to it, layer by miserable layer, hoping it wouldn't make your day harder than it already was. Start with the basics, the fabric. Unless you were noble, your clothing was made from rough, homespun wool that scratched like straw and smelled like the animal it came from. In summer, it soaked up sweat and dried stiff. In winter, it barely held back the cold, trapping damp air between your skin and the itchy weave. Linen was the luxury of the slightly better off, used for underclothes if you were fortunate. But even then, it stained easily, tore quickly, and was rarely laundered. Most people owned 2 sets of clothing at best, one to wear, one to repair. If you tore your tunic or burned your sleeve by the hearth, you didn't replace it. You mended it. Again and again, until the patchwork outnumbered the original cloth. Then came the weight. For women especially, a single outfit could weigh the better part of a modern toddler. Long skirts trailed through dirt and dung, soaking up mud and urine from the castle yard. Aprons, overdresses, and head coverings were required, not for fashion, but to keep dust out of your hair and soot off your sleeves. You moved like you were dragging a sail behind you, one stitch away from tripping down the stairs or catching your hem on a loose nail. Men wore long tunics, heavy cloaks, and surcoats that bore the grime of daily labor and the scent of everything they passed: livestock, smoke, sweat, and human waste. Washing these clothes was a task that bordered on futile. There were no soaps as we know them, just harsh lye, or sand, and water hauled from the well. Laundry day meant bruised knuckles and scraped palms. It meant beating your garments against rocks or scraping them with knives to remove hardened filth. And once they dried, stiff as boards, you put them back on and hoped they didn't chafe worse than before. Shoes were another form of quiet torment. If you had any, they were flat leather things with no arch support, no lining, and no protection from wet or cold. Most castle dwellers went barefoot more often than not, especially indoors, where floors were layered with rushes meant to absorb filth, but mostly just trapped it. Clothing in a medieval castle wasn't tailored or treasured, it was endured. You wore it like armor against the world, but without the protection. It pinched, dragged, scratched, and stank. It was your second skin, only it fit worse and made you bleed. The castle might impress with its banners and stone, but underneath all that pageantry, everyone looked and smelled just as miserable as they felt. When winter crept through the cracks of a medieval castle, it didn't knock. It barged in, uninvited and unforgiving. The stone walls, which looked so mighty and eternal from the outside, turned into ice boxes on the inside. There was no insulation, no sealed windows, no plush rugs or padded furnishings to hold warmth. The cold didn't just visit in winter, it took up residence. And if you wanted to survive it, there was only one real heat source you could rely on: yourself. Fireplaces existed, yes, but only in select areas. The Great Hall might have one, a wide open hearth with a fire large enough to light shadows dancing on the ceiling beams. But your room, if you had one at all, had no such luxury. Most castle residents slept in chambers that doubled as storage spaces, animal shelters, or communal dorms. The walls sweated with condensation. The air sat heavy with frost. If you left a bucket of water out overnight, you'd find it crusted with ice by morning. Your breath fogged the air around you, proof that your lungs were doing more to warm the room than any architectural feature. To battle the cold, you layered. First with linen, then wool, then whatever else you could find. Animal skins, damp cloaks, even sacks. You curled into yourself like a dying fire, pressing your limbs close to conserve what little warmth you had. You slept beside others not just for companionship, but because body heat was a shared commodity. Children were piled together like kindling. Elders were kept near the middle of the group to avoid the cruel draft that seeped in through every stone seam. There was no privacy, no personal space, just the knowledge that if you didn't press close to another shivering body, you might not wake up at all. Blankets, if they existed, were thin and worn. The rushes on the floor were barely enough to soften your sleep, let alone shield you from the frigid kiss of the stone below. There were no hot water bottles, no mittens, no central fire that gently hummed away in some hidden chamber. If you wanted warmth, you made it. You were the furnace. And your fuel, your own aching, exhausted body. Bathing in the cold months was nearly unthinkable. Even the thought of shedding your layers was terrifying. The idea of submerging yourself in water, probably fetched from an icy stream or rain barrel, was as close to voluntary hypothermia as you could get. You went unwashed. You rubbed your arms raw for circulation. You huddled near whatever candle or cooking flame was burning. And you prayed that your teeth would stop chattering long enough to get through the day. The lords didn't care. They had their own heated chambers, braziers, and fur-lined beds. But you learned quickly that warmth wasn't a right. It was a fight. And most days, you lost. Winter didn't care how tired you were. It didn't care if your fingers went stiff or your lips turned blue. The stone held the cold like a secret. And every night, it whispered it into your bones. The grandeur of a medieval castle fades quickly once you realize you're not the only creature living in it. Beneath the banners and behind the battlements, the castle seethed with life, but not the noble kind. Rats scurried through the rafters like they paid rent. Mice darted under rush-strewn floors, slipping between the cracks in the stone like shadows with teeth. Fleas nested in every blanket. Lice claimed your scalp as sacred territory, and bedbugs turned your straw mat into a feast. If you thought a castle meant security, you were half right. Vermin were secure and thriving. There was no pest control, no traps, no sprays, no awareness that maybe, just maybe, living shoulder to whisker with disease-riddled rodents was a bad idea. Cats were kept, yes, but not nearly enough to make a dent, and most of them were too smart to go where the plague lived. You could hear them at night, the scratching in the beams, the squeaks behind the wall hangings, the occasional thump of something larger falling from a rafter. You tried to ignore it. You had to. Because it wasn't a question of if the rats were there. It was how many. And how hungry. These weren't the timid cartoon mice of modern imagination. These were survivalists. Thick-bodied, sharp-clawed, fearless. They chewed through sacks of grain, gnawed into furniture, and left droppings in the same bowls you used for soup. They swarmed kitchens when the lights or torches went out. They died in your walls and filled the air with rot. They birthed in your boots, raised litters in your bedding, and gnawed your candle stubs when the food ran low. But the worst weren't the rodents themselves. It was what they brought with them. Fleas, black as soot and quick as sparks, carried something far crueler than a bite. The plague. Bubonic. Pneumonic. Septicemic. Words that meant nothing to the people of the time, but left entire households silenced in days. One bite from a flea that had fed on an infected rat could be the beginning of a slow, agonizing death. Boils, fevers, vomit, black with blood. You didn't recover. You prayed to die fast. Lice added insult to infection, nesting in your hair, laying eggs by the thousands. You scratched until you bled, your scalp crusted over. You wore scarves, not for style or warmth, but to hide the infestation from those even worse off. And every time you itched, you wondered what new sickness was being stirred under your skin. In a castle, no wall was thick enough to keep the vermin out. They thrived in the same warmth, the same shadows, the same mess that human life required. You learned to live with them because you couldn't escape them. You shared your meals, your sleep, your breath. The nobility could flee to the countryside when plague struck, but the rest of you? You stayed behind with the rats and hoped your body wouldn't bloat and blacken before the week was out. A castle wasn't a fortress against nature. It was nature, raw, crawling, scratching, and biting, an infested monument to human hubris. There's no alarm, no smoke on the horizon, no trumpet to announce its arrival. One day someone coughs. By the end of the week, they're dead. By the end of the month, so are half the people you know. The plague doesn't knock in a medieval castle. It kicks the door in. And when it does, it doesn't matter that your lord has a title or that your walls are thick. In fact, those same walls that were meant to keep danger out, they now keep the sickness in. Castles were designed for defense against men, not against microbes. They were cramped, poorly ventilated, and crowded with servants, animals, and refuse. You shared space with everyone: coughers, sneezers, moaners, bleeders. Disease didn't just thrive here, it partied. If one person got sick, it didn't take long for the entire household to follow. There were no quarantines, no clean water, no understanding of hygiene. You might be living 2 chambers away from the infected, but it made no difference. Rats, fleas, and air didn't respect your personal space. The Black Death wasn't the only killer, just the loudest. Before it came storming through, you had leprosy, dysentery, typhoid, and smallpox. And they were all regulars. One bad pot of stew, one communal basin filled with filthy water, one careless moment wiping your mouth after tending to the sick. That's all it took. And when it hit without mercy. People vomited black bile, broke out in weeping sores, or simply collapsed and never stood up again. There were no doctors. There were leeches and prayers and occasionally a wild guess involving garlic or pigeon blood. They didn't save you. They gave you false hope while your insides turned to rot. The worst part? You couldn't leave. If you were a servant or peasant, the castle wasn't just your home. It was your prison. Running away meant being seen as a deserter, a thief, or worse, a carrier. The countryside wasn't always safer. Sometimes it was even worse. So you stayed. You watched your friends sweat and choke and scream. You held hands with dying children. You helped dig graves until the ground was too hard or too full. And still you stayed. Nobles, of course, had options. They could flee to their manors or summer homes, abandoning their castles like a sinking ship. They'd take their trusted servants, their food stores, their physicians. You were not invited. You were part of what they left behind. And you knew that when, or if, they returned, your body might still be there. Or not. Either way, you wouldn't be remembered. In a world without antibiotics or soap, disease was the true ruler. It didn't care for your rituals, your candles, your noble blood. It arrived unannounced, devoured the living, and disappeared without apology. A castle may have kept out arrows and raiders, but it couldn't stop what came in on a breath. Water in a medieval castle wasn't life, it was a calculated risk. You needed it to drink, to cook, to clean what little you could, and yet every drop could be the start of your undoing. There was no plumbing, no understanding of germs, no purification beyond maybe letting the water settle or throwing in a handful of herbs and hoping for the best. And so every sip from the well in the courtyard was like spinning a wheel that never had enough good outcomes. One turn might quench your thirst. The next might fill your guts with fire. The castle well was meant to be a source of security, dug deep into the earth, protected by stone, hidden from enemies. But it couldn't hide from filth. Waste seeped in. Runoff from the stables, rot from discarded food, even decomposing animals tossed carelessly in times of siege or famine. There were no filters, no screens, no safeguards. Rats drowned there. Frogs festered. The water was cloudy more often than it was clear, and no one asked too many questions about the taste. You drank it because there was no choice. During a siege, when supply lines were cut off and rivers out of reach, the well was everything. Guards lined up with buckets. Kitchens rationed it out in ladles. But with so many people inside the walls, soldiers, servants, animals, the contamination spread quickly. People dumped waste in corners or tossed chamber pots out windows. Not all of it landed where it should. Some of it found its way back into the water, soaking through the soil and into the well itself. And nobody knew. Or if they did, they didn't care. You needed water more than you feared it. What came from it, though, was slow death. Dysentery. The word didn't exist for them, but the agony did. Cramps that felt like your stomach was folding in half. Bloody diarrhea that left you too weak to stand. Fever, shivering. Dehydration so fast your lips cracked and your tongue turned into leather. You'd watch strong men bend double in pain, and within days they were gone. There was no treatment, no electrolytes. Just hope that you could hold down some bread and that your body would decide to fight, not fold. Children were the first to go, then the old, then the unlucky. The castle would stink of sick rooms and soiled rags, and still people drank, because the only alternative was dying faster of thirst. Beer was safer, but beer took time, ingredients, and skill. Alewives brewed what they could, but it was weak and warm and never enough for everyone. So you lined up at the well, looked down into its dark, silent throat, and hoped it wasn't your turn to be swallowed. Clean water was a myth, and thirst didn't wait for myths to come true. In a medieval castle, water wasn't a right or a resource. It was a gamble. And every sip was a quiet dare to whatever gods might be watching. You don't bathe in a medieval castle. You stew. Filth settles on you like a second skin, clinging to your scalp, your clothes, your breath. Hygiene, as we know it today, didn't exist. Soap was a luxury, baths were rare, and personal cleanliness was more of an aspiration than a habit. Most days, you wake up already feeling unclean, already sticky with sweat and grime from the day before, and it only gets worse from there. Washing wasn't ritual, it was a rumor. And in the castle, that rumor never reached the servants' quarters. Water was hard to come by, and when it was available, it wasn't clean. You didn't just fill a tub and soak while someone read poetry in the next room. If you were a peasant or a servant, You scrubbed yourself with a rag dipped in lukewarm, possibly rancid water from a wooden basin that had already been used by 5 other people. If you were lucky, someone had thrown in a sprig of herbs to mask the smell. If you weren't, it smelled like wet wool and something vaguely spoiled. You rubbed until your skin turned red, but not cleaner, just rubbed. The idea of a full-body bath was so uncommon it bordered on exotic. Nobles might indulge once or twice a year, sitting in steaming tubs perfumed with flowers and milk, their skin slathered in imported oils. But that was fantasy, not daily life. For everyone else, cleaning yourself meant wiping your hands, brushing crumbs from your tunic, and maybe pouring a cup of water over your head on a feast day. Most of the time, you simply marinated in your own sweat. You didn't bathe, you baked. Clothes weren't washed either, not regularly. You wore the same linen shirt until it could stand up on its own. Layers were meant to absorb the sweat, not prevent it. Your outer garments were rarely cleaned, just brushed down or aired out in the breeze. The result was a personal odor that followed you like a shadow, not just your own, but everyone's. The great hall reeked of unwashed hair, feet, fermented breath, and wool soaked in human oils. People spoke of bad airs causing disease, but the cure never involved washing. It involved prayers, incense, and occasionally bloodletting. Insects loved this. Fleas thrived in your bedding, your clothes, your beard. Lice lived in your hair, scurried across your scalp, and sometimes nested in your eyebrows. You scratched constantly, sometimes until you bled. And if you did bleed, that was a whole new issue, because under the layers of filth, your skin was cracked and raw, and infection was always waiting. Hygiene wasn't a routine, it was a luxury, and it belonged to someone else. So you carry on, dirty and resigned, hoping your stench blends in rather than stands out. In the medieval castle, no one smelled good. The goal was not to be the worst. Cleanliness wasn't next to godliness. It was nowhere near. It was something you imagined existed in a better world, one with water, privacy, and the chance to scrub yourself without risking dysentery. Life in a medieval castle meant that your well-being hinged on the whim of one man, the Lord. His mood wasn't just a private matter, it was law, gospel, weather, and judgment all in one. If he woke up irritable, everyone around him braced for impact. His frown became a threat, his silence a storm warning. And if you were the closest target, servant, guard, cook, stable boy, it didn't matter what you'd done or hadn't done. Proximity was guilt. Punishment was inevitable. There was no such thing as due process, no hearing both sides. If the Lord believed the bread was too hard, the cook was flogged. If his boots weren't clean enough, the stable hand went without supper. If the wind blew wrong and he decided the gods were angry, someone was tossed into the stocks for blasphemy. It wasn't justice. It was theater. And the audience always bled. You learned quickly how to read him, his footsteps, his cough, the way he gripped his goblet. If he was quiet at breakfast, you kept your head down. If his dog limped, you made sure the kennel boy didn't cross his path. A nobleman's emotional weather could change the entire rhythm of the castle. Tasks paused. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Everyone adjusted like prey animals sensing a predator nearby. Because that's what he was. A predator with a title and the legal right to harm. And there were no safe roles. A maid sweeping too loudly. A footman looking too long. A boy forgetting to bow deep enough. These weren't crimes. They were excuses. You didn't have to actually fail to be punished. You only had to be convenient. If you were new, unfamiliar, unlucky, or simply in view when he stubbed his toe or got bad news from a messenger, you bore the cost. It wasn't just physical beatings, though those were common and expected. Sometimes it was silence that cut deepest, being ignored, passed over for food, stripped of duties or dignity. Sometimes it was reassignment to a worse job, mucking stables or emptying chamber pots for a month. Other times it was public humiliation, a punishment not meant to correct you, but to display his power. A reminder, carved into your back or smeared across your pride, that your existence was subject to his feelings. And everyone watched. They had to. If they didn't, they could be next. Averted eyes suggested guilt. A neutral expression could be mistaken for defiance. So you learned to nod, to agree, to laugh on cue, to join the mockery, even when it sickened you. Because showing solidarity with the punished was as dangerous as disobeying directly. The Lord could be kind, could be just. But kindness was a mood, not a policy. And you never knew which version of him would descend the staircase each morning. In a castle, fear didn't wear armor. It wore silk, drank wine, and decided your fate on a whim. In a medieval castle, nightfall didn't bring calm, it brought danger. Because lighting the dark meant flame, and flame meant risk. There was no electricity, no gentle flick of a switch. Illumination came from fire, candles, torches, hearths, and fire in a structure built of timber, pitch, and layered straw was as much a threat as any enemy at the gate. Every flickering candle was a gamble. Every torch a countdown to disaster. Fire brought warmth and visibility, yes, but it also brought dread. Candles weren't the neat, safe tools we think of today. They were clumps of tallow, animal fat, wrapped around a wick, greasy to the touch, foul in scent, and wildly unpredictable. They dripped, spat, sputtered. A single careless elbow could tip one over, and the flame would catch the nearest fabric, rush up a curtain, or disappear into the thatched roof above. You didn't light one unless you had to. You never left one unattended. And you always knew where the nearest bucket of water was, assuming there was water at all. Torches were worse. Used in corridors, stairwells, or held by guards making rounds, they rained sparks with every movement. The smoke filled the narrow halls, blackened stone walls, and soaked into tapestries like a curse. And they couldn't be put down, not without risk. So you carried them carefully, arm aching, heart pounding every time the flame danced too close to the low-hanging beams above. One misstep, one gust, one sneeze at the wrong moment, and the castle became a coffin. The great hall might have braziers or a roaring hearth, but the warmth didn't travel far. The rest of the castle remained cloaked in shadow, lit by small, trembling flames. And even those were a problem. Flame consumed oxygen. In poorly ventilated chambers, especially during winter when everything was sealed tight to keep out the cold, candles could suffocate you slowly. And if they didn't, their soot would. Your lungs filled with smoke, your eyes watered constantly, your clothes reeked of burnt fat. Light came at a cost, and that cost was health, safety, and sanity. And then there were the accidents. A servant falls asleep beside a candle and wakes to fire licking the edge of a straw mat. A gust of wind blows a torch sideways onto a banner. A noble's robe brushes an open flame during a feast, and panic erupts. Screaming, stamping, the sloshing of water or wine onto flames. If the fire spread, there were no alarms, no fire brigade, just buckets, wet cloth, frantic hands, and desperate prayers. Some castles kept sand barrels in the halls for emergencies. Others relied on luck. Most relied on servants, and blamed them when things went wrong. You lived every evening under the weight of that possibility, that tonight might be the night something burned. And once it started, It spread fast. Castle fires weren't slow disasters. They were hungry, chaotic, merciless. Stone walls might remain, but roofs collapsed. Stairwells became chimneys, and smoke killed faster than flames. All from one candle, lit a second too soon. In a place where flame was life, every spark was a silent threat. In a medieval castle, sleep was not a retreat. It was a compromise, a fragile truce between your exhausted body and a hostile environment that never truly rested. There were no bedrooms for the lower ranks, no private chambers for servants or guards. What you had was a shared space, a cold, drafty hall, or a cramped loft where bodies were packed shoulder to shoulder like sacks of grain. Personal space was a luxury for the nobility. For everyone else, sleep happened wherever there was floor, straw, and room to curl up. Barely. You didn't have a bed. You had a mat, if you were lucky. More often, you had straw scattered across stone or a wooden plank raised just enough to keep your face out of the dust. There were no pillows, no sheets, just the clothes on your back and maybe a coarse wool blanket shared between 2 or 3 others. You wrapped yourself tightly, not for comfort, but to keep out the cold and the lice. You didn't sleep alone, ever. Not in the sense we think of today. Guards dozed in shifts near you, snoring into their beards. Stable hands slumped on the floor with the stench of manure still clinging to their tunics. Cooks lay with flour still on their cheeks. Feet pressed against your back. Knees knocked into yours. It was less rest and more human Tetris, crammed into whatever corner was warmest. And someone was always snoring. Always. And the noise wasn't just snoring. It was coughing, muttering, whispering prayers in the dark. It was the rustle of restless limbs, the creak of joints long abused by hard labor. It was someone grinding their teeth, someone else letting out a series of flatulent explosions with all the subtlety of a battlefield. No one apologized. There was no point. You couldn't escape it. You just got used to the symphony of digestive rebellion. The smell was worse. Sweat, unwashed feet, sour breath, damp wool, and the lingering scent of whatever the kitchens had burned that evening. All of it soaked into the air. Freshness didn't exist. Windows were small, if there were any at all, and most stayed shut against the cold, trapping heat and odor alike. The result was a fog of humanity so thick you could practically chew it. If you didn't fall asleep gagging, you learned to breathe shallow and dream deep, and even in sleep, you weren't safe. You could wake up with someone's elbow in your eye or a boot pressed to your ribs. Someone might roll over and take the blanket. Someone else might talk in their sleep about something you wish you hadn't heard. And if a noble's messenger arrived late, calling for fresh torches or new orders, you'd be shaken awake and sent scrambling into the dark with no regard for how little rest you'd gotten. There was no privacy. Not to change, not to weep, not to fart in peace. Every moment of your life was lived in proximity to someone else. The castle wasn't just your workplace. It was your dormitory, your barracks, your prison cell. Sleep was never peaceful. It was just a pause between shifts. And when you woke, groggy and aching, you knew exactly what kind of day you were in for, because you'd already spent the night living with the enemy. In the stone guts of a medieval castle, silence was a fantasy. Every whisper bounced, every breath echoed, every secret had an audience. The walls were thick, but the air was thin with privacy. You didn't just live shoulder to shoulder with dozens of others, you lived ear to ear. Conversations didn't stay where they started. They crept under doors, slipped through cracks, and amplified like confessionals carved in limestone. The architecture itself conspired against discretion. Every room was an echo chamber, and the walls had more than ears. They had voices. Stone carries sound in a way that no tapestry or wooden beam could muffle. A simple conversation in the great hall could drift into corridors. Footsteps in the stairwell resonated through the walls like a warning bell. Even laughter, especially laughter, rattled the bones of the place, reaching rooms far removed from the source. And in a world governed by hierarchy and suspicion, sound wasn't just an annoyance, it was a liability. There were no secrets, not really. A careless remark made while scrubbing a chamber pot could find its way into a noble's ear before nightfall. A joke muttered during supper could be twisted, stretched, and repeated until it resembled sedition. The cook's assistant might overhear a noble's quarrel through a wall. A squire might catch the tail end of a whispered affair echoing through a stone hallway. And once a story took shape, it grew teeth. Gossip was currency in the castle, and everyone traded it. Maids, guards, scribes, even priests. Especially priests. It wasn't just petty talk. Gossip could kill. A servant accused of stealing a ring, even falsely, might be flogged, dismissed, or vanish entirely. A whisper that a chambermaid had caught the Lord's eye could destroy her reputation and future in a single breath. Say the wrong thing about the wrong person, and it might be your last meal. Because power in a castle wasn't always worn in the open. It moved in shadows, in titles, in the loyalty of a guard captain, or the favor of a lady. And when those kinds of people felt threatened, they didn't confront you. They erased you. Everyone knew this. Everyone adapted. You learned to speak in half sentences, to murmur into sleeves, to look behind you even in empty rooms. You watched your tone in the latrine, your phrasing at the well, your facial expressions at supper. You could say one thing and still be accused of another. It didn't matter what you meant, only what someone else thought they heard. And once a rumor started, you couldn't outrun it. It moved faster than a plague and bit harder than steel. So you stayed quiet, or tried to. You bit your tongue when the Lord's son stumbled drunk into the kitchen. You kept your gaze low when the lady's maid left a room looking pale and shaken. And you didn't ask questions, because in the castle, nothing stayed hidden. Not your voice, not your thoughts, and certainly not your sins. The walls listened, the halls spoke, and the truth, twisted or not, never needed a second telling. Being the lowest on the ladder in a medieval castle didn't just mean hard work. It meant danger, constant, unforgiving, and ignored by everyone above you. If you were a kitchen boy, your entire existence revolved around things that could burn you, slice you, crush you, or kill you slowly without anyone noticing until you stopped showing up for work. You were nameless, faceless, and entirely disposable. You didn't have a future. You had fire, knives, and the knowledge that nobody was coming to save you if things went wrong. And they often did. Your day started before dawn, not with light stretching lazily across the stones, but with a sharp slap on the back and a rush to the kitchen hearth where the embers never fully died. You fed the flames, fanned the coals, and jammed logs into ovens that roared back like beasts. There were no fireproof gloves, no tongs unless someone let you borrow them. You reached in with your hands, wrapped in whatever rags you could find. Burns were a daily certainty. Second degree if you were careful, worse if you weren't. Then came the blades. Not elegant little tools made for slicing fruit, but cleavers, saws, and knives as long as your forearm. You used them to hack through pig bones, skin hairs, gut fish, and chop root vegetables so hard they cracked like firewood. The blades were never sharp enough for comfort, but always sharp enough to bite. You worked fast because speed was the only thing that mattered to your overseer. Slip once, and your finger could be gone. Slip twice, and no one would even ask where you went, just who was replacing you. The floors were stone and always slick, greased by fat, spilled ale, or blood. You ran across them carrying boiling pots, sloshing with stew or water or rendered animal fat. There were no mop crews. If you slipped, you fell hard. You might crack your ribs, your head, your elbow. And you wouldn't get a bandage. You'd get yelled at for making a mess and told to get up, bleeding or not. Food poisoning wasn't something that happened to guests. It happened to you. You tasted meat to check for rot, sniffed cream that had sat out too long, drank the water from barrels because it was all there was. You cleaned the knives that had just carved raw poultry, then used the same cloth to wipe down the breadboards. Germs didn't have a name back then, but they still killed. If your stomach twisted or your fever spiked, you worked anyway. Or you didn't. And then they buried you behind the stables, no questions asked. And yet, the expectation never let up. Every dish had to be perfect. Every plate filled to overflowing. Every command obeyed instantly. You didn't get praise. You didn't get breaks. You got burned hands, a sore back, and the occasional stale crust thrown your way if a noble decided not to finish their supper. Being a kitchen boy wasn't just hard, it was a death wish, written in heat, sharpened in steel, and swallowed without thanks. Step outside your chamber in a medieval castle, and you don't find a peaceful garden or a scenic courtyard. What you find is chaos, rank, slippery, and always a few heartbeats from violence. The courtyard, that open space between your 4 cold stone walls and the next round of exhausting labor, is not a sanctuary. It's a battlefield disguised as daily routine, where danger doesn't wear armor. It wears mud, hooves, steel-toed boots, and the stink of everything that's ever died or been dumped there. You're not walking to fetch water. You're running a gauntlet. The ground is never dry. It doesn't matter what season it is. In summer, it's churned into a slurry of animal waste and spilled ale. In winter, it freezes into a jagged crust of ice mixed with manure and blood. This is not exaggeration. Livestock moves through here constantly. Pigs squealing, goats charging, chickens flapping like they've just seen the devil. They eat, they poop, and they panic without warning. Step in the wrong spot and you're knee-deep in filth. Slip once and you're down, face first into a mix of dung, piss, and yesterday's stew. And then there are the knights. These aren't the shining heroes from stories. They're sweaty, bored, arrogant men with too much armor and not enough battles. The courtyard is their training ground, their proving ground, their stomping ground, and you are very much in the way. Sword practice happens whether you're watching or not. A wild swing might pass inches from your face as 2 squires spar without noticing or caring that you're trying to pass with a bundle of firewood. You get elbowed, kicked, knocked flat, and no one even looks back. You're not a person here. You're an obstacle. Horses make it worse. War horses are massive, temperamental, and badly trained. They clomp and snort and stamp without warning, especially if some bright-eyed young noble is trying to impress his peers by riding through the yard at a gallop. You don't hear them until they're too close. Hooves strike stone, people dive aside, and if you're too slow, you learn what it feels like to have a rib cracked by a mounted boot. No one stops to check. They'll ride over you and call it a lesson in awareness. The smell is legendary. The courtyard is where butchers drain animals, where sick dogs crawl to die, where waste buckets are dumped from upper windows because someone was too lazy to walk it out to the dung pit. Add the smoke from the forge, the grease of the kitchen vent, and the reek of unwashed bodies, and it becomes a fog of rot and fire that clings to your skin long after you've gone inside. But still, you have to cross it, to haul wood, to get water, to deliver a message, or fetch your master's forgotten cup. You dart through it like prey in a forest, head down, heart racing, because in this courtyard anything could knock you down, and nothing will pick you up. The chapel inside a medieval castle was supposed to be a haven, a place of light, peace, and salvation amid the filth and fear of daily life. It looked the part sometimes, with narrow stained glass windows casting colored beams across worn stone, the air thick with incense and reverent silence. But don't let the flickering candles and carved saints fool you. That quiet didn't mean safety, because in this world, faith was never gentle. It was bloody, brutal, and inescapable. And the chapel was just another stage where pain wore a holy mask. You walked in with bowed head, not out of humility, but fear. Religion was everywhere, and everyone knew someone who had been punished by it. A sermon wasn't a conversation. It was a threat in poetic Latin. You didn't understand most of it, but you understood the tone. You were born sinful. You would die sinful. The only thing between your soul and eternal torment was obedience to the church. And the church didn't ask. It demanded. And then came the rituals. They were supposed to cleanse you. They often did the opposite. Holy water was reused constantly, growing murky with the oils and skin flakes of the dozens of peasants who dipped into it before you. Communion bread was handled by hands that had just offered blessings and butchered livestock. Shared chalices passed across dozens of mouths, sick or well. If someone coughed blood into the wine, you drank anyway. To refuse the Eucharist was unthinkable. Better to risk infection than damnation. Confession was no relief either. You knelt in a dark corner, whispered your sins to a priest who might have known your father, your neighbor, your secrets. There was no anonymity, no safety. If the wrong thing was said, or misinterpreted, you could be labeled a heretic, a witch, an enemy of God. And then the chapel stopped being symbolic and became literal judgment. Inquisition, interrogation, torture, all could start here, under the same crucifix you were told would save you. Penance could be anything, lashing your back until it bled, kneeling on stone for hours until your knees swelled and split, fasting until you vomited bile. These weren't punishments for crimes. They were paths to grace. You inflicted pain on yourself to prove your soul was worth saving. And if you didn't do it voluntarily, the priest might assign it to you anyway, with a smile and a prayer. Then came the relics, bones of saints, shards of the true cross, teeth, hair, fingers, held up in silver orbs like prizes. People touched them, kissed them, believed they healed the sick. But they were rarely clean, often rotting, and sometimes outright forgeries. It didn't matter. The power of belief was more contagious than any plague. You kissed the moldy bone and prayed it didn't infect you. You had no choice. In theory, the chapel was a place of hope. In practice, it was a sanctified pressure cooker, a place where fear wore robes and pain was just another form of praise. You didn't walk out feeling saved. You walked out relieved you survived. For now. You've heard the word dungeon So many times, it barely stings. It's a fantasy term now, an idea wrapped in torchlight and mystery, padded by Hollywood myth and tabletop games. But in a medieval castle, the dungeon wasn't a story. It was a hole, a pit in the stone where light forgot to reach, and time stopped moving. No chains on clean walls, no dramatic speeches or clever escapes. Just stone, stink, and a kind of silence that devoured sound and people. The dungeon was never meant to be seen by visitors. It wasn't part of the tour. It was tucked beneath the floors of the keep or buried in the rock of the hill, a place you reached by descending crooked stairs, slick with slime and rat droppings. The door wasn't grand, just wood bound in iron, often swelling from damp, swollen so badly it creaked like a living thing. Behind it, misery so thick it clung to your clothes. The air was stale, but somehow wet, like a breath left too long in a coffin. There were no cells in the romantic sense. No iron bars, no individual chambers, just space, a shared, awful space. If you were thrown in, you landed hard, no mattress, no straw, sometimes no floor, just mud or stone slick with things you didn't want to identify. You weren't alone either. Rats lived here full time. Insects, too. So did corpses. Occasionally, if the guards were too lazy or the weather too cruel to fetch them out. Dead men sat next to dying men, who sat next to terrified boys who had no idea what they'd done wrong. And no one told them, not ever. Torture wasn't always part of the dungeon. That happened elsewhere, on designated racks, under the eye of a professional with tools laid out like surgical instruments. But the dungeon itself did plenty of damage without assistance. The lack of food, of air, of warmth, those were enough to kill slowly. You didn't scream for help because no one heard you. Or worse, someone did, and they just didn't care. If you were lucky, you rotted in the dark for days. If you were unlucky, it was weeks, months. Some never came out. The only light was sometimes from a small hole high above, and only during the day, if there even was one. The stench was alive, a hybrid of human waste, mold, and something older. Hopelessness, maybe. You learned to stop breathing through your nose. You learned not to sleep too deeply. You learned to forget the sun. And when they did come for you, there was no trial, no defense, no clean robes or waiting judges. A nod from the Lord, a whisper from a priest, a rumor that you'd spoken against the crown or stolen from the kitchen, and that was enough. Maybe they questioned you, maybe they didn't, but the dungeon always welcomed you back. It wasn't a place, it was a verdict. And in the medieval world, you didn't need to be guilty to earn it. You just needed to be unlucky. Marriage in a medieval castle was not a storybook ending. It was a transaction, pure, strategic, and brutally impersonal. You didn't fall in love. You were placed, assigned, matched like livestock, bartered like property, and sometimes wed before you were old enough to understand what the union meant. Love, in this world, was a luxury for fools and poets. What mattered were bloodlines, land rights, dowries, and alliances that could shift the balance of power by the size of a bride's inheritance or the strength of a groom's army. If you were a noblewoman, your fate was signed away long before your first period. Fathers arranged marriages like business deals, trading daughters for titles, money, or land. You might be 10, he might be 40. It didn't matter. If the match benefited your family, you'd be sent off with your best linen and worst fears, escorted to a place you'd never seen, to wed a stranger you were expected to obey, serve, and, if the gods in your pelvis allowed, reproduce with as quickly as possible. Your opinion was not required. For men, marriage was no gentler. You could be ordered to marry a woman you found repulsive, dull, or dangerous. Your own parents or your liege lord might command it. Perhaps she came with a valley you needed to defend. Perhaps her father could raise 50 knights to your banner. You didn't say no, not unless you wanted to start a feud, lose your lands, or invite disinheritance. Marriages weren't emotional events. They were tactical maneuvers played out over mead and scrolls, with your life reduced to a chess piece. Once married, your duties were painfully clear. A wife was expected to manage a household, produce heirs, and maintain the illusion of loyalty, even if her husband vanished for months on campaign or returned home reeking of brothels and blood. A husband, in turn, had the legal right to control his wife's body, choices, and property. Abuse was not just common, it was sanctioned within limits. A wife could be beaten reasonably to keep her in line. What reasonable meant depended on who was watching. Divorce was not an option, not for regular people. Annulments existed, sure, but only for the powerful, and even then only through the church's narrow loopholes. You were too closely related? Maybe. You hadn't consummated the marriage? If you could prove it. But most couples, once bound, stayed bound, through hatred, boredom, resentment, or indifference. Marriage wasn't about joy, it was about stability. And suffering in silence was a mark of success. Affairs happened. Love sometimes grew in shadows, with a knight's squire, a lady's maid, a visiting minstrel. But those were risks. Risks that ended in ruin, disgrace, or worse, execution, if you offended the wrong names. And still, people took them. Because in a world where marriage was a sentence, secret love felt like rebellion. Brief, foolish, glorious. So no, marriage wasn't a promise of happiness. It was an economic agreement sealed with wine and witnessed by men with ledgers. You weren't marrying a person. You were marrying an outcome. And whether it brought you a castle, a coffin, or a life of quiet despair, that was just the cost of doing business. Being a noblewoman in a medieval castle wasn't freedom. It was a different kind of prison. One with silk sheets instead of straw mats, but the bars were just as real. People often imagine castle life for women as elegant, refined, filled with embroidery and music. But behind those carved stone walls and brocade dresses was a life defined by duty, danger, and suffocating expectation. You weren't living a fairy tale. You were the living property of your father, then your husband, and eventually, if you were lucky, your son. Your value was measured in how well you obeyed, how politely you suffered, and how effectively you birthed children, especially male ones. Beauty wasn't a blessing. It was bait. If you were lovely, you were watched more closely. Desired by men who believed your body was a prize owed to them by rank or favor. You were dressed up like a doll, painted with herbs and crushed minerals, paraded for visiting nobles, and praised for your posture more than your thoughts. The more attractive you were, the less safe you became. A passing knight might flirt, a visiting lord might demand more, and your own husband might treat you less as a partner and more as a decorative asset. You didn't wear makeup to express yourself. You wore it because being beautiful was your job, and sometimes your doom. Education was limited. You might learn to read a little, enough to recite prayers or manage the accounts of a household. Music, manners, needlework, yes. But philosophy, law, or even basic governance? That was for men. And yet, you were still expected to manage an entire estate if your husband left for war, pilgrimage, or politics. You had to command servants, settle disputes, and ensure the manor didn't fall into chaos. And when you succeeded, you'd get no credit. When you failed, the shame was yours alone. Privacy didn't exist. You were dressed by others, bathed by maids, and often shared your bed with your children or your ladies-in-waiting. Every move you made was monitored. Every word you said could be used against you in a rumor, a scandal, or worse. If you spoke too freely, you were rebellious. If you stayed too quiet, you were dull. If you showed ambition, you were dangerous. The castle judged you with the sharpest knives, not in the kitchen, but in the eyes of the court. Childbirth was a gauntlet. You weren't just expected to produce heirs, you were expected to survive it again and again without complaint. Your womb was public property. People whispered about it, guessed at it, gossiped about it when your belly grew or didn't. If you died in childbirth, your name might be remembered, on a plaque, in a prayer, or maybe not at all. Because while your death was tragic, your failure to provide a son was a more urgent concern. And yet, noble women endured. They schemed when they could, wrote letters in secret, forged alliances in whispers. Some ruled lands in their husband's absence. Others influenced kings from behind curtains. But power came at a price. And even the highest tower couldn't lift you above the fact that in a medieval castle, your silk gown didn't shield you from suffering. It just made it quieter, more graceful, easier to ignore. Pregnancy in a medieval castle was never a private, sacred moment. It was public business. The castle watched your body like a clock, waiting for signs, whispering over the shape of your belly, calculating due dates and fortunes based on your swelling feet and morning nausea. And once labor began, your pain didn't make you exceptional. It made you expected. You were performing a civic duty. The success of dynasties, the fate of lands, the balance of alliances, all rested on your ability to survive something you had almost no control over. And the castle, for all its stone grandeur, was not designed to keep you alive. There were no doctors. Not really. A midwife might come, if she could be found quickly enough. She would bring knowledge passed down from other women, along with rough hands and herbs whose names had been whispered through generations. She had seen things, survived things, maybe buried a few too, and you hoped, desperately, that she knew what she was doing, that the baby wasn't in the wrong position, that you wouldn't bleed too much, that there wasn't an unseen fever waiting to strike just as the crying began, because infection was inevitable. There were no sterile linens, no washed hands, no antiseptic or clean instruments. The tools of birth were the same ones used yesterday, with blood still crusted in the seams. The birthing room, if you were lucky enough to have one, was stuffy, dim, filled with the smell of sweat, wax, stale herbs, and fear. If you had status, your ladies-in-waiting would crowd around you, sometimes to help, often just to watch. You became a living relic in the moment of your own crisis, gripped with agony, while others counted contractions and muttered prayers. Stillbirths were common, so were miscarriages, and if the baby survived, the dangers weren't over. Many infants died within days, from cold, from infection, from curses whispered by jealous rivals, or so people believed. Superstition was medicine, and when medicine failed, superstition took over completely. Babies were anointed, hidden from spirits, kissed with crosses, or even tested with rituals to confirm they weren't demons in disguise. A healthy child was a miracle. A living mother, even more so. If you were unlucky, if the labor turned, and you couldn't deliver, there were no options, no surgery, no C-section, just agony, prayers, and waiting. The midwife might attempt to turn the baby by hand. She might reach inside you, mutter a spell, pour wine down your throat. But if the baby was stuck, or if it died in the womb, the result was almost always two deaths, one small, one slow. And the castle would move on. Meals would still be served. Bells would still toll. The world would barely notice. In a medieval castle, pregnancy wasn't a celebration. It was a test. Not just of your body, but of your place in a cruel and fragile world. You didn't get baby showers. You got last rites. You didn't get nursery plans. You got funeral cloths prepared, just in case. Because behind every noble lineage was a blood-stained floor and a woman who rolled the dice with her life to give someone else a future. In the cold belly of a medieval castle, childhood wasn't a protected phase of innocence. It was a countdown. The clock started ticking the moment you cried out from the womb, if you made it that far. Half of you didn't. Disease, famine, accidents, bad luck, bad water, bad gods, anything could take you. And no one was surprised when it did. Death in childhood wasn't rare. It was expected. If you made it to 5, people started learning your name. If you made it to 10, they started assigning you chores. And if you lived much past that, you were already considered halfway to adulthood. There were no toys beyond what your imagination could scrape together. Sticks for swords, bits of cloth for dolls, games made from stones and string. There were no schools unless you were noble, and even then, education was less about curiosity and more about memorizing scripture, Latin conjugations, and your proper place in the hierarchy. For the poor, there was no time for such things. You learned by watching and by working. If your father was a smith, you lifted hammers. If your mother cleaned chamber pots, you followed with a rag. There was no age minimum, no child labor laws. You were small and breathing. That meant you were capable. Boys were sent to the stables to muck manure, or to the kitchens to chop vegetables with knives far too big for their hands. Girls fetched water, mended cloth, or helped birth their younger siblings. There was danger everywhere. Fires, scalding pots, heavy hooves, falling timber. You might get kicked by a horse, bitten by a dog, or scalded by boiling soup, and there was no emergency response team coming to help. Just a slap on the back and a whispered prayer. If you limped, you limped. If you screamed, you were told to be quiet. Weakness was not endearing. It was inconvenient. And yet, if you were noble, your body might be protected, but your future wasn't yours. Marriages were arranged before puberty. Sons were betrothed by 7, daughters by 5. Your life path was inked before you learned to read it. Play was tolerated until your first significant growth spurt, after which you were expected to act like a miniature adult, complete with duties, expectations, and punishments. There were no teenage years, no coming-of-age milestones where you figured yourself out. You went from small to useful in the time it took your bones to stretch. Illness struck constantly. Fevers, rashes, fits, the pox. Some children simply stopped breathing in the night. Others wasted away without reason. Parents cried, yes, but not always for long. Another would be born soon. Life had to go on. Mourning was a luxury for those with time, and in a castle, no one had time. So you didn't grow up. You were shoved forward. Childhood wasn't a season, it was a hurdle. And if you tripped, no one waited. They just stepped over you. You think you're tough until you've locked eyes with a rat bold enough to challenge you in your own bed. In a medieval castle, rats don't hide in the shadows. They live right alongside you, unafraid, unbothered, and unquestionably in charge. At night, they emerge from the cracks in the stone walls, squeaking and scrabbling like a tiny army on patrol. You hear them before you see them, claws against wood, tails whipping across flagstones, teeth gnawing through whatever they can find, be it leather, linen, or leftover crusts. And then you do see them. Black eyes in the candlelight, a twitching nose, a pause, a stare, and the quiet understanding that if a fight breaks out, they're winning. They scale the bedposts with the confidence of creatures who've done it 100 times. They sniff your face while you sleep. If you're lucky, you'll wake up with only a few droppings near your feet. If you're not, they'll have chewed a hole in your pillow or nibbled at your toes. And if you try to chase them off, they don't scatter. They freeze, stare, as if daring you to do something about it. One squeak, and suddenly you're the one backing down, because they've been here longer, and they know your fear. Rats go where they want. Storerooms, kitchens, latrines, bed chambers. They follow warmth, moisture, and food, of which your sweaty, anxious body provides plenty. You might try traps, but you're working with crude technology. A bit of bait, a spring-loaded jaw if you're lucky, or just a weighted rock and a prayer. Poison's a joke. Most concoctions kill people faster than rats. Cats help sometimes, but even they hesitate when the rat population gets too confident. You'll watch a cat retreat from a confrontation it knows it can't win. And it's not just the nuisance, it's the disease. Rats don't just squeak in the night and ruin your sleep. They carry death. Their fleas bring plague, typhus, misery in microscopic form. One rat bite could turn into a fever, then swelling, then silence. But even knowing that, you don't light more candles or sleep elsewhere, because there's nowhere else to go. Your chamber is stone and straw and suffering, and the rats know it. They've made themselves at home. The worst part is how quickly you adjust. The first week you scream. By the second you flinch. By the third you stop reacting. You pull your blanket tighter, shove a boot toward the edge of your mat, and pretend not to feel them as they scurry across the room. You don't chase them anymore, because you know they'll be back. Because you know they never left. Because in the dark of your castle chamber, the rats are braver than you, and they win. If you fall ill in a medieval castle, you don't seek treatment. You prepare your last words. Because the moment you step into the care of a castle healer, your odds of survival drop faster than your blood pressure. Literally. There's no such thing as diagnosis in the way we understand it. There's only humors, 4 invisible fluids that supposedly control your health, mood, and fate. Are you coughing? That's too much phlegm. Aching joints? Clearly your black bile is out of balance. The solution? Drain it. From somewhere. With something sharp. And quickly. Bloodletting is the castle doctor's favorite solution, regardless of your condition. Fever, infection, headache, it doesn't matter. Out comes the blade. They tie a cloth around your arm or neck, make a shallow slice, and let you balance your fluids onto the dirt floor. Sometimes they'll catch it in a bowl, which you're supposed to thank them for. The more you bleed, the better they think you'll feel. Of course you don't. You feel dizzy, cold, weak. But you're told that's part of the process. That means it's working. Leeches are the next weapon in the medieval medical arsenal. Not sterile, not clean, just pulled from a swamp and slapped onto your skin. You don't get a say in where. Maybe your back. Maybe your temple. Maybe somewhere deeply personal. They suck and squirm, bloating with your blood. And when they fall off, you're expected to thank them. Or worse, you're told to save them for the next treatment. Because in a castle, nothing goes to waste, not even your own misery. And then there's the medicine, if you can call it that. Dried dung mixed with honey, boiled nettles in vinegar, ground bones and ashes, stirred with river water and mumbled prayers. These are not supplements. These are punishments masquerading as cures. Your healer might also recommend wrapping you in onions or chanting a protection spell while waving a heated iron over your body. It's unclear whether the ritual is meant to scare the demons away or scare you into pretending you feel better. Surgical procedures, if needed, are even worse. Without anesthesia, you're held down, screamed over, and cut open with a blade that's been used on the last 10 patients. Infection is expected. Survival is unlikely. There's no germ theory, no antiseptic, no hope. And if you die during treatment, the healer isn't blamed. They simply say the humors were too far gone. Or worse, that God had other plans. You go to the castle healer not to recover, but to gamble, to bet your life against outdated books, rusted tools, and bad guesses. You leave with less blood, fewer answers, and maybe a leech still attached to your calf. In this world, healing is just the long road to the grave, and castle medicine is little more than a crime scene with robes and incense. There is no true inside in a medieval castle, just layers of outside stacked on top of each other. The thick stone walls that defend you from siege also trap the cold in your marrow. They don't insulate, they refrigerate. And once winter sets in, the entire castle becomes a stone refrigerator with rooms barely warmer than the courtyard. You don't escape the cold when you step inside. You just change the flavor of it. It's less wind-biting and more bone-deep. A kind of chill that doesn't just sting your skin, it settles into your joints and stays there like a curse. Your bed doesn't help. You don't have a feather mattress or fur sheets unless you're nobility. And even they aren't warm, just slightly less miserable. Most people sleep on straw stuffed into a rough sack, barely lifted off the freezing floor. The straw absorbs moisture from the air, and by morning it's damp with your sweat and breath. You're wrapped in thin wool or linen that holds more drafts than heat. The blankets are shared if you're lucky. The body heat of others is your only true furnace, but it's also how you catch every winter illness within 3 households. The fire doesn't come to you. There are no fireplaces in the peasants' quarters or servant rooms. Only the main halls might have a hearth, and it's the size of a doghouse, not a furnace. You don't sit by it, you wait your turn. The heat doesn't reach the walls, let alone the upper floors. And when you return to your corner, it's like re-entering a cave. Breath fogs from your mouth, water freezes in your jug, and your fingers are too stiff to even pull the blanket tighter. You wear all your clothes at once. There's no wardrobe, just layers, wool on linen, rags on wool. It doesn't matter if they match or if they're clean. What matters is survival. Your toes go numb first, then your fingertips. Then the shivers start. You curl up like a trapped animal, hands between your thighs, back to the wall, praying that sleep doesn't turn into hypothermia. You don't wake up refreshed. You wake up grateful to still feel your limbs. Castle corridors are worse than the chambers. The wind whistles through arrow slits and unsealed cracks, carrying icy drafts through the stairwells like ghost hands. There's no carpet, no insulation, no mercy. Your feet slap bare stone with every step, and the chill seeps up through the soles like frostbite in slow motion. Even the nobles walk briskly indoors, not from urgency, but because standing still means freezing in place. You don't complain. You can't. The cold isn't a malfunction. It's how the world works. You endure it, like everything else in the castle, because the only alternative is death or exile to somewhere colder. The stone walls were built to last forever, and they will. The warmth of your body, however, is fleeting. In a castle, heat is not a comfort. It's a memory that vanishes the moment you stop moving. There's no such thing as silence in a medieval castle. Not really. And when the usual clatter of boots, groaning hinges, barking dogs, and coughing servants dies down, something else creeps into your ears. Music. Except it's not the kind that soothes or inspires. It's a shrill, droning, ever-present performance courtesy of the castle's resident minstrel, or bard, who was hired not based on talent, but availability, and whether he could carry a lute without falling over. The noble family demands entertainment, and you're caught in the crossfire. Because music in a medieval castle isn't ambiance, it's acoustic tyranny. Minstrels don't ask if anyone wants to hear a song. They play because they're told to, or because they're trying to earn a few more scraps of bread. And there's no escape. Lutes echo through every corridor, especially when played badly, which is most of the time. High-pitched strings screech with every wrong note, and nasal voices carry through stone like wailing ghosts. A half-tuned fiddle at full volume can make your teeth rattle, and the sound of someone attempting harmony after 3 cups of thick ale is enough to make a praying monk swear. The acoustics of a castle, built for defense, not audio quality, means sound doesn't just travel, it ricochets. What starts in the Great Hall ends up in your ears 2 floors away, no matter how many blankets you stuff against the door. The songs themselves aren't much better. Ballads about brave knights and weeping maidens. Ditties about harvests and virtue. Endless verses about the noble lord's family tree, performed with the enthusiasm of someone halfway to madness. If you're lucky, the minstrel runs out of breath. If you're not, he's just getting started on a 20-verse saga about an ancestor who wrestled a bear for a ring of cheese. And you're expected to smile, to listen, to applaud when he finishes, even if it sounded like a dying goat trying to play a harp. You can't complain either. To mock a minstrel is to risk offending the Lord who hired him. You'll be labeled as ungrateful, joyless, or worse, disrespectful. And in a castle where power trickles down with the subtlety of a falling anvil, even an eye roll can earn you punishment. So you nod, you fake a laugh, you tap your foot like you're enjoying yourself, all while praying for a thunderstorm to drown it all out. And God's help you if the bard is drunk. Then the music doesn't just get worse, it gets louder. Lyrics slur, tempos lurch. The lute becomes a weapon in its own right, swung around like a cudgel in rhythm to some long-forgotten war hymn. Drunken nobles join in, off-beat and off-key, stomping in circles as the stone walls throb with noise. What you hear in the castle isn't harmony. It's auditory punishment wrapped in tradition. Music in a medieval castle wasn't optional. It was imposed. Not to lift spirits, but to prove culture, to impress guests, to flaunt control, to fill the void of endless gray days. It didn't matter if it was good. It only mattered that it was loud. And once it started, there was no safe room, no quiet refuge. Just the long, vibrating realization that in this fortress of misery, even the arts have teeth. You don't notice it at first. You're used to it. Everyone is. But once in a while, the stench hits you like a brick wall. It clings to everything. Your tunic, your hair, the air itself. You smell like labor, like sour breath, and last week's stew. Your boots reek of damp straw and manure. Your armpits betray you by mid-morning. And there's no hiding it, no bottle of something floral to dab behind your ears, no mint to chew. In a medieval castle, there is no deodorant, only sweat, smoke, old meat, and despair, and it all lives on your skin. You try. Everyone tries. You crush herbs like rosemary or lavender and tuck them under your arms, between your legs, anywhere that might help. Some rub vinegar on their bodies in the hope that it will kill the worst of the smell. Others burn incense nearby, trying to make the room smell like something other than people. But it doesn't work. The herbs wilt. The vinegar turns. And the incense just adds another note to the growing bouquet of misery. Because here, you're not clean. You're only less filthy than the next person. Bathing is rare. Water is cold, and hauling it is backbreaking. Soap is expensive and rough. Most people wash once a week if they're lucky, once a month if they're not. When they do, it's with a basin and a rag, or if you're truly blessed, a wooden tub you share with family members. The water is reused, dirtier with each dunk. The smell never leaves. It just evolves. Your clothes don't help. They're made of wool or coarse linen, rarely washed, and cling to the stench like a second skin. You wear them day after day until they're too stiff to bend. They absorb everything: sweat, cooking grease, the smoke from the hearth, the breath of the person you had to stand too close to in the corridor. Even if you strip them off at night, they don't dry. They just cool into stiff, smelly shells that you reluctantly crawl back into each morning. And of course, the castle itself doesn't exactly encourage freshness. The privy wafts through the halls. The kitchens emit a permanent fog of boiling animal fat. The servants' quarters reek of unwashed bodies and old straw bedding. Even the lord's chambers, with their expensive tapestries and perfumed oils, can't escape the odor of enclosed air, chamber pots, and damp stone. Still, you pretend not to notice, because saying anything would be rude, because everyone smells, because you've learned to live with it. You keep your distance when you can, breathe through your mouth when you can't, and pray that no one gets close enough to wrinkle their nose and step back. In a world without cologne or toothpaste, you carry your scent like a shameful banner, and all you can hope is that the person beside you smells just a little bit worse. You think washing clothes might offer a moment of cleansing relief, some small spark of satisfaction in a day defined by filth. But in a medieval castle, laundry isn't a reset. It's a punishment that shows up weekly and leaves you colder, wetter, and angrier than before. The task falls to you if you're a servant, or, in poorer households, to every woman with hands that still work. There's no break in the routine, no corner of the castle where this chore is somehow easier. Just stone, water, and the aching throb in your wrists as you scrub until your fingers split. There's no washboard, no detergent, no gentle cycle. Just a basin, usually made of stone or thick wood, filled with icy water hauled in by hand, and a hunk of homemade soap that smells like a crime. Soap, in this world, is a concoction of animal fat and wood ash, boiled down into a foul, gritty slab that burns if it gets into a cut. You rub it into the fabric until it foams, or at least froths, and then you scrub that linen into the basin like you're trying to punish it. The water freezes your skin, but your muscles burn, and neither pain lets up. Laundry in winter is a kind of torture. The water never warms. The cloth stiffens even as you wring it. Your hands go numb, then red, then cracked and bleeding, and still, there are more tunics to wash. If you're working near the castle's laundry yard, the space is cramped and echoing with the slap of wet cloth against stone. Every breath you take steams in the air, but you keep working, because there's a pile behind you that doesn't shrink, because someone will check, because there's always someone watching. And this isn't just about cleaning clothes, it's about status. If the laundry stinks, the noble house stinks. And if you're the reason, it's your hide. So you bend over the basin and scrub until the wool is raw and your back is permanently arched, praying that no stain lingers, no smell remains. Except they always do, because the water you're using has been used by others, because your clean is just a little less dirty than before. Once washed, the garments are laid out to dry, on hedges, stones, stretched ropes if you're lucky. In warm seasons, that means dust and bird droppings. In cold ones, it means frozen cloth stiff as iron. You peel them off their lines, fold them in ways that still drip, and carry them back with your arms sore and your temper short. There is no pride in clean laundry, just the knowledge that tomorrow the sleeves will be caked with sweat again, and this whole miserable ritual will repeat. You don't finish laundry day with the smell of lavender or the warmth of clean fabric. You finish it with chapped knuckles, wet feet, and the creeping sense that everything in this castle, including your efforts, will always be just a little bit dirty. The pantry should be a place of comfort, a storehouse of safety against hunger. In a medieval castle, it's the opposite. It's where hope goes to fester, literally. The air inside is thick, stale, and tinged with the sour scent of things that should have been eaten last week. But nothing in this room comes without risk. Every bite is a gamble. And when you open the door, what hits you first isn't the sight of abundance, but the stench of decay creeping out from beneath stacked barrels and hanging cuts of meat that haven't stopped aging since the day they were slaughtered. Preservation is a desperate art. Salt is precious. Vinegar is rare. Smoking meat only delays the rot. So what you end up with are legs of mutton gone gray, fish that's more slime than scale, and poultry so pungent you can taste it in the air before you touch it. Everything is a compromise. Mold on the cheese, scrape it off. Bread gone hard as stone, soak it in beer and chew until your jaw gives out. Worms in the grain, pick them out if you can see them. Otherwise, swallow and pray they're already dead. Pantry workers don't get masks or gloves, just their bare hands and a nose that eventually stops noticing. You sort flour crawling with weevils, rice that moves on its own, and barrels of pickled cabbage whose lids hiss when opened. Every container is suspect. Every sack of oats could be harboring a small civilization of insects. But what choice do you have? You can't throw it away. Waste isn't an option. The castle's supply lines are unreliable at best, and if the weather turns or a siege begins, this filth becomes your lifeline. Even when food looks good, it might not be. Spoilage hides. Sausages hang overhead, sweating oil and attracting flies that leave their eggs in the folds. Root vegetables rot from the inside out. Apples collapse into themselves like dying stars. And still, this is where the meals come from. The kitchen boys come in with baskets, coughing from the mildew, trying not to gag as they pick out the least offensive items for stew. There is no fresh, only not the worst. Sometimes what you eat makes you sick, and you know exactly what caused it. The meat was off. The butter tasted wrong. The beer had a film. But you eat again the next day because hunger doesn't care about memory. You chew, you swallow, and you hope it passes. If it doesn't, you'll be curled in a corner, praying to sweat out whatever plague your pantry has delivered this time. Food in the castle isn't nourishment, it's endurance. The pantry doesn't feed you, it tests you. And the fact that anyone survives a winter on its offerings isn't a miracle. It's a testament to just how far people can go before their stomachs finally give up. Justice in a medieval castle isn't about fairness, it's about fear. There's no such thing as a trial in the way we understand it. No impartial judge, no defense, no appeal. You disobey, you suffer. Not after a warning, not after a second chance. Immediately. Justice comes swift, loud, and designed to make an example out of you. The castle doesn't run on law. It runs on dominance. And the only thing worse than being accused is being right and powerless to prove it. Punishment is public, always. There's no dignity in it. You're dragged to the courtyard, the hall, the front of the gate where others can see, because your pain is part of the process. Your agony is a warning to everyone else who might be thinking of speaking out, stealing bread, or showing up late for their duties. The lord or steward doesn't need a reason. Sometimes it's just a bad mood, a delay, a missing tool, a lie they imagine you told. Doesn't matter. You're already on your knees. The tools of justice are crude. A whip made from knotted leather strips, each laced with bone or metal. The sound it makes is unforgettable. A crack, then silence. then the scream. 10 lashes break skin. 20 take it down to muscle. Flogging is common. Branding is for special occasions. Hot iron pressed into your back, your thigh, your face. The wound sears, the skin bubbles, and you are marked for life as property, traitor, or thief, depending on the symbol burned into your flesh. Then there are stocks. Simple devices of wood that hold your arms and head in place, leaving you exposed to the elements, to mockery, to whatever the crowd feels like throwing. Rotten vegetables if you're lucky. Fists and boots if you're not. Days can pass before someone lets you out, if they remember, if they care. And if you've offended the wrong person, someone noble, someone untouchable, you might not see the light again. You're dragged into the dungeon, shackled to stone, and forgotten. Worse punishments exist: mutilation, eye gouging, tongue removal. If the crime is seen as a challenge to authority, then the punishment must be unforgettable. Hands are chopped off for theft, ears for gossip. A peasant who strikes a noble might find themselves hanging by their ribs in an iron cage. You die slowly, exposed to the elements, picked apart by crows and whispers. And the guards? They're the ones who make it happen. Not out of justice, out of order. Because in the castle, law doesn't protect the weak. It shields the powerful. Everyone else just hopes to survive the system long enough to die of something else. There's no fairness here. No reform. No mercy. Justice is not blind. It's watching. Always. Ready to make an example of whoever stumbles next. And if it lands on you, you'll know it the moment the lash cuts air and silence falls. Because pain doesn't need a reason in a place like this. Only a victim. You don't read. No one around you does either. Words, real words, ones etched in ink, not just scratched into wood or stone, belong to someone else. Someone distant. Someone powerful. In a medieval castle, literacy is not a skill. It's a class division. The priest can read. The steward, maybe. The Lord's children, if they're lucky. But you've never even touched a book, let alone opened one. Pages are parchment, precious, locked away like treasure behind chapel doors, or stacked high in the noble's study where you're not allowed to enter, let alone linger. And if you do get a glance, the writing looks like the twisting lines of some spell, alien, sacred, and sharp with judgment. So, how do you learn? Through your body, through watching others suffer and learning not to repeat their mistakes, through silence, through fear. You know the steward hates dawdlers, so you move fast. You know the cook doesn't forgive broken jugs, so you carry them with 2 hands. You know what happens if you spill something on the Lord's boots, because you saw what happened to the boy who did. That was 3 winters ago, and no one's seen him since. That's how you learn, not with letters, with scars, yours or someone else's. Knowledge flows downward here, but it doesn't trickle. It drops like a stone and crushes whoever doesn't get out of the way. The priest says things from the pulpit that sound like riddles. He talks of sin and obedience, of burning eternally for speaking out of turn or stealing or thinking the wrong thoughts. And you believe him, not because you understand, but because the fear is clear enough. You see it in his eyes. You see it in the trembling of the other servants. You see it in the cold echo of the chapel where no one breathes too loud. That's what passes for education. Myth, threats, and the occasional sermon designed to keep you numb and small. And then there are the rumors, the whispers that curl like smoke through the servants' quarters and around the kitchens, that the neighboring castle fell to a fire started by a ghost, that a stable boy was turned to stone for sneaking a bite of the priest's bread, that the queen drinks the blood of pigs to stay young. None of it's written, but all of it is real, because stories are all you have, and they work. You flinch at shadows. You cross yourself at the sound of wolves. You whisper apologies to the hearth spirits before you sleep. You believe in curses because the only thing worse than being wrong is being punished anyway. So no, you can't read. But you know the language of the lash. You understand the grammar of silence. You're fluent in the dialect of survival. And in a castle where books are chained and truth is a weapon, sometimes fear is the only thing that keeps you alive. When the sky darkens over the castle, you feel it in your gut before you hear the first crack of thunder. The air shifts. The animals grow restless. Somewhere, a dog begins to howl, and someone makes the sign of the cross, just in case. Storms in the medieval world aren't just weather. They're omens, messages from a sky full of angry gods and vengeful spirits. And inside these towering stone walls that look so invincible from the outside, you discover just how fragile a fortress really is. Because stone may stand tall, but it doesn't stand silent. When the storm hits, the whole place groans like a wounded beast. Rain doesn't just patter, it hammers. The wind doesn't whisper, it screams. Drafts snake through every crack, fluttering the rushes on the floor and setting tapestries billowing like sails. The walls shudder with each gust, and for a moment you wonder if the whole thing might simply lean too far and never recover. The roof above is timber, old and half-rotted in places. You know this because you've seen the stains. Everyone has. Water finds its way in through every weak beam, dripping through the ceilings, soaking your straw bedding, turning your already miserable corner of the castle into a leaking stone coffin. Lightning flashes, not once or twice, but in bursts that feel too close. Each one illuminates the room like an angry god striking a match. And then comes the thunder, rolling in so hard it shakes your bones. You can hear the roar echoing through the towers, the halls, even the deepest chambers below. The castle, this monument to strength, is suddenly alive with tremors. Doors rattle, stones shift. You swear you see dust rain down from the vaulted ceilings. Someone screams in another room. Maybe they saw a shadow. Maybe a candle fell. Maybe their fear just boiled over. And fear is everywhere. People whisper about what lightning means, that the gods are angry, that a devil's eye is passing over the land, that a witch in the village cast a storm for vengeance. No one says these things loudly, but they don't have to. The glances, the gasps, the frantic clutches of amulets, these tell the story well enough. You sit hunched in a corner, your body cold and your skin damp, every nerve pulled tight. You're not thinking about prayers. You're thinking about the mortar in the wall to your left, about how deep that crack has gotten since winter, about whether the next boom will bring down a stone. The storm doesn't care about titles. It doesn't respect battlements. It treats noble halls and servant closets the same, with disregard. It rattles the whole edifice like a cup in a child's hand, and you, tucked into some damp corner with a threadbare blanket, feel exactly that helpless. The thunder isn't just sound, it's judgment. And the castle, no matter how mighty, isn't exempt. It shivers with you, stone bones and all, as if it, too, remembers just how close death can be when the sky decides to strike. Peace in a medieval castle is never peace. It's a pause. A silence so heavy you can hear it creaking under its own weight. The stone walls might seem calm, the drawbridge might be lowered, and the banners might flutter gently in the breeze, but anyone with sense knows it's never going to last. War is always coming. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but soon, and everyone knows it. Because a castle doesn't exist without enemies. The very fact that it was built means someone, somewhere, wanted to take what it protects, or raze it to the ground. The signs are everywhere. Soldiers don't rest, they drill. Their armor clinks across the yard like a ticking clock. You see the blacksmith working longer hours, reshaping blades, straightening bent arrowheads, hammering dents out of helms that haven't seen battle in weeks. Why? Because battle is always expected, always rehearsed. The stores in the cellar, salted meat, dry beans, hard bread, aren't for winter. They're for the siege. For the moment when the gates slam shut, the water runs low, and the air inside the walls turns to iron. You live with the constant hum of warning. A messenger's gallop on the road makes the guards lean forward. A plume of smoke on the horizon sends the Lord's hall into motion. And you know the routine. Check the oil cauldrons, inspect the arrow slits, test the winches, count the bolts. Everyone pretends it's maintenance. Everyone knows it's panic. Because when war does arrive, it never knocks. It crashes in, catapults, fire, screams. And when it does, the castle you thought was your home becomes a trap, a stone cage with no exit. Siege is a slow death. It's not just swords and arrows. It's starvation, thirst, disease. It's days of holding your breath between bombardments, nights of hearing your enemies drink from the stream just beyond your reach. It's watching your food rot and your morale rot faster. The Lord gets meat. You get the crumbs. The well runs dry, the wine is rationed, and soon every breath you take tastes like smoke, mold, and fear. If a wall is breached, there's no safe room, no miracle defense. The slaughter is fast and indifferent. You're not a soldier. You're collateral. Even if the enemy doesn't breach the gates, they breach your mind. Siege wears you down in layers. First your sleep, then your hunger, then your sanity. You hear things. You start to imagine who among you might open a door in the night, who might run, who might turn. You stop trusting. You stop speaking. You start counting the days by how many rats you saw, alive or dead. So when the days are quiet and the sky is clear, you don't breathe easy. You don't relax. You wait. Because castles weren't built for peace. They were built for war. And war is patient. It always shows up. Eventually, the first week of a siege is noise, yelling from the ramparts, the thump of catapults, the screech of arrows. But it's what comes after that truly breaks you. The silence, the waiting. The days when the attackers stop firing, not because they've retreated, but because they've settled in. They've got time. And time is the deadliest weapon. You're not going to be stormed by an army of men. You're going to be gutted slowly by your own hunger. The gates are closed. The roads are cut. There's no coming out. No one's coming in. And whatever you've got in the pantry, that's all you get, however long it lasts. The rations start strict. Meat is counted. Grain is locked away. Wine is doled out by the half cup. Water even less. You get your portion and try to make it last, chewing slowly, ignoring the knot in your stomach that refuses to loosen. There's still some structure, still some illusion of control. But then the vegetables run out. Then the salted pork is gone. The bread gets thinner. The mold starts to grow, and suddenly, what used to be trash is now breakfast. And dinner, and maybe tomorrow's hope, too. People start lying, hoarding, hiding bits of food in straw mats, under their beds, in their clothes. Fights break out over crusts, not insults. A kitchen servant misplaces a sack of barley and winds up beaten half to death by guards who smell hunger on his breath. You hear rumors of rats being caught, cooked, shared in secret. Then you see someone chewing something in the corner of the stables, something you can't quite identify, and you don't ask questions. You just look away. Because the only thing worse than knowing is realizing you do the same. The sickness comes fast. Weak bodies are easy prey. A cough turns into fever, then vomiting, then death. Sanitation collapses under pressure. The waste piles up. So do the corpses. There's no time to bury the dead properly. No one wants to carry them. No one has the strength. The bodies lie in corners, covered with blankets or left bare, their eyes open, their mouths frozen mid-gasp. You walk past them because you have to. There's nowhere else to go. The worst part? The smell doesn't shock you anymore. The rot becomes normal. You stop noticing it. What you do notice is the way people look at each other. Hungry, wary, quiet. You see someone limping and wonder if they've got something edible in their pack. You hear someone crying at night and wonder if it's from grief or because they're finally out of food. The air inside the castle thickens, not just with smoke or disease or stench, but with dread. Hope dies quieter than people think. It doesn't wail, it just fades. This is siege. It's not about storming the gates. It's about sealing them and waiting for the people inside to destroy themselves. And when the final surrender comes, if it comes, there's no celebration. Just relief and shame, because survival meant watching others starve, and because part of you knows the worst might not be over. It might just be different. The quiet moments are the worst, because they don't stay quiet. You might be hauling water across the courtyard, brushing dust from a staircase, or handing bread to a child when it happens. A sharp whistle cuts the air, a sound too fast and thin to track. Then a scream, jagged and awful, rising behind you. Someone's been hit. Maybe you don't look. Maybe you do. Either way, there's blood and panic and shouting, and someone's dragging the body, maybe a friend, maybe a stranger, away from the open air and into the shadows. You press yourself against the wall, heart pounding, breath caught, waiting for the next whistle, the next scream. This is what it means to live under siege. Constant exposure. The castle walls are high, but not high enough. The attackers don't have to break down the gates, they just have to wait. And remind you, they're out there. Arrows come without warning, loosed from far-off hillsides or hidden siege towers. There's no visible archer, just the sky turning dangerous. You could be working in the yard, walking the battlements, fetching firewood. Any task, no matter how routine, can become your last if you step too far into the open. Some people try to time their movements. They think there's a rhythm, a lull, a safe moment between volleys. But there isn't. The archers don't fire in neat intervals. They fire when they feel like it. Sometimes one arrow, sometimes a dozen, sometimes nothing for hours, just to lull you into the illusion of safety. And then they remind you. A guard chatting by the gate slumps forward with a shaft through his spine. A maid running water to the chapel doesn't make it past the well. You get used to it in the worst way. You move quickly. You duck instinctively. You glance up at the sky like it's a second enemy. No place is truly safe. Not the tower, not the kitchens. Arrows find gaps in wooden shutters, holes in stone walls, chinks in metal helmets. You huddle in corners and hope they're not aiming for shadows. Even sleep becomes cautious. You dream of screams. You wake to the moans of someone else not waking at all. And you start counting people less by name and more by absence. Where's the blacksmith? Did the baker's boy come back? Have you seen the gate watch since yesterday? The answers get quieter, shorter, sometimes just a shake of the head. The archers don't want to kill everyone. Just enough. Enough to keep you afraid. Enough to make you flinch at open spaces and hesitate before crossing a doorway. Their arrows aren't just weapons. They're messages. We're still out here. We haven't forgotten you. You may have walls, but you don't have peace. And in a castle under siege, that message is more effective than any battering ram. Because once the fear settles in your bones, the enemy doesn't have to fight you. You start doing it to yourself. The ceilings in a castle are not your allies. They don't protect, they wait. Some of them, especially near the gates or over narrow stone passageways, are rigged with openings called murder holes. Innocuous at a glance, just part of the architecture, like so many strange things in this place, until something hot and heavy drops from them. That's when you understand. You've been walking beneath a loaded trap, and it doesn't take a siege for it to go off. It just takes bad timing. Murder holes aren't theoretical. They're not decorations. They are funnels for agony. When invaders breach the first gate, defenders dump hell through those holes. Rocks, arrows, molten pitch, hot oil if it's available, even boiling water or sand. Whatever they have that will maim, burn, or blind on impact. If you're unlucky enough to be in the wrong place, gravity becomes a weapon, and you become a lesson. People have died screaming beneath those holes without ever seeing the face of the man who killed them. But here's the thing. They're not just used on invaders. They're there, permanently. Which means they loom above every servant, every child, every tired guard who trudges through the wrong corridor during tense days. And sometimes, during a siege, the lines get blurry. If you don't respond fast enough, or if someone panics, the stones fall anyway. Collateral damage isn't a concern when the walls are under threat. And if you're sent to fetch water near the gate while arrows whistle past and someone's yelling to prepare the oil, well, best to sprint, or better, pray. Then there's the boiling oil itself. It's not always used. Oil is expensive, but when it is, the smell is something you never forget. It turns meat into horror in seconds. It clings. You can't scrape it off. You can't outrun it. One splash, one slosh, one clumsy hand, pouring it too early, and a man becomes a pile of boiling flesh within moments. And the oil doesn't care who you are. If it spills the wrong direction, if you're near the wrong wall, if someone drops a cauldron early or misjudges a gust of wind, it's over. You'll burn from the outside in, with no priest fast enough to save you and no healer foolish enough to try. Walking through a castle during war is not just tense, it's a constant gamble. The architecture is as much a threat as the enemy. You watch the ceilings. You learn to listen for footsteps above, for the hiss of heat, for the panic in someone's voice that means the cauldrons are coming. You hug walls. You hold your breath beneath grates. Because here, death doesn't just come through the gate. Sometimes it drips from the ceiling. The scent alone is enough to make your stomach turn traitor. It floats down from the high table in the great hall, rich and cruel. Roasted meat, fresh herbs, butter melting into golden bread. Your mouth waters even though you know what's coming. It's not for you. It never is. That boar, crisped and dripping with fat, turning slowly on the spit for hours, that's for the Lord and his guests. The thick, honey-glazed partridge, the steaming venison stew, the cheese wheels and blood-red wine, all of it laid out in lavish display under candlelight, guarded by armed men in polished mail. You watch it pass by, one platter at a time, escorted like royalty to the head of the hall. You get none of it. What do you get? Turnip soup, if you're lucky. A grayish mash of roots and bitter herbs boiled in whatever water was clean enough not to kill you today. There's no meat in it. Maybe a bone, if the kitchen boy was feeling generous or forgetful. The bread is old, dry, sometimes green at the edges. You don't eat it. You gnaw it. And if the ale's watered down, you're grateful. It's the only thing that washes the taste of rot out of your mouth. Sometimes you're forced to serve the feast. That's worse. You have to walk it in, past rows of hollow-bellied servants who pretend not to stare, past the dogs who know they'll be fed better than you, past your own rumbling gut. You hold the platter high while your arms burn. You can smell everything. You can see the juices pool beneath the skin, but you can't touch it. Not a bite. Not a crumb. The punishment for stealing from the Lord's table is as harsh as the hunger that tempts you. Fingers cut off, flogged, shackled in the stocks while children throw dung at your face. And you'll still be hungry when it's over. And the nobles? They eat like kings, even if they're just minor lords with debts and dirty boots. They laugh with greasy hands and belch between courses, shouting for more wine, more goose, more whatever their swollen bellies crave. They toss scraps to their dogs that you'd kill to taste. Sometimes, if they're feeling generous, they'll hurl bones at you like you're part of the kennel. A treat, they call it. A joke. And you pretend to laugh. Because this is your life. This is castle feasting when you're not the one in velvet. Your hunger doesn't count. Your appetite is irrelevant. You're here to serve, to starve, and to smile through it. And when the feast is done, when the last goblet has been drained, and the nobles stagger off to sleep off their gluttony, you gather the scraps, not to eat, to feed the pigs. The pigs who, tomorrow, will be roasted and served. Again, not to you. When the first snow falls outside the castle, it brings a hush that fools you into thinking something gentle has arrived. But that silence is a lie. It's not peace, it's a siege from within. The walls that were meant to protect you now feel like a prison. The gates sealed not from invaders, but from the very world itself. Days blur into a frozen sameness, and the cold creeps into your bones like guilt. There's no fresh air, no sunlight, just endless gray filtered through arrow slits. And with nothing to distract them but hunger and boredom, people begin to turn on each other. At first, it's small things. A missing blanket, a look that lingers too long. Someone accuses someone else of taking more than their share of oats or sneaking an extra ladle of broth. There's no proof. But proof doesn't matter when trust has already gone brittle from frostbite and famine. Voices raise. Accusations echo through stone corridors that amplify every whisper like thunder. Fights break out over nothing. Someone's seat near the fire. Someone else's breath that smells too much like stolen garlic. Knives aren't drawn yet, but fists are. And everyone's hands are already raw with cold and labor. You begin to realize that the walls don't just keep enemies out, they keep desperation in. People stop speaking unless they have to. They step around each other like animals in a shared cage. The hierarchy frays. Even the steward looks over his shoulder. No one wants to be caught alone in a corridor after dark. The cold has a way of stripping down civility, and what's left underneath is sharp, mean, primal. The guards, idle and freezing, grow paranoid. They invent threats where there are none, search rooms looking for non-existent plots. You hear rumors of secret meetings in the cellar, of stolen wine, of hidden knives tucked into hay beds. Someone gets caught hoarding dried apples meant for the Lord's table and is publicly beaten. The message is clear. The rules still apply, even as everyone slowly starves. By the second month of winter, you don't recognize the people around you. Their faces are pale, hollow, eyes darting like they expect betrayal at any moment. You avoid the great hall when it's not mealtime. Too many watchful eyes, too many murmurs. You eat your turnip stew in silence, avoiding confrontation because it's easier to be ignored than to be noticed and suspected. The firewood runs low. The kitchen rationing grows strict. Someone starts boiling old leather belts. The stench is unbearable, but people eat it anyway. One morning, a man is found dead by the hearth, his face twisted, his mouth still full of straw. No one claims to know what happened, but everyone knows. He snapped, or someone snapped him. Either way, it's a warning. The walls may be stone, but they don't protect you from madness. Winter doesn't just freeze the world, it fractures your home. It's a bitter joke among the castle servants, but no one's really laughing. The Lord's horse lives like a king, and you, well, you clean up after it. Stabled in a warm, straw-laden corner of the bailey, the animal enjoys daily brushings, regular feeding, and water from the cleanest buckets. It's not luxury, it's necessity. That horse may carry the Lord to war, hunt, or ceremony, and its value is measured in gold. Yours is measured in silence and scars. The stable boy tends to the horse's comfort with more care than your aching back has ever received. If it gets sick, the castle's best effort goes into saving it. If you do, they might not even notice until you're already cold. Your bed, if you can call it that, is a sack of musty straw wedged against a damp stone wall, often shared with fleas, damp, and another person's breath. Meanwhile, the horse's stall is swept clean, its bedding refreshed, its feed mixed for digestibility. The irony stings worse than the straw cuts. While you chew on dried barley crusts or soup stretched thin with turnip water, the horse chomps oats selected by hand, sometimes sweetened with honey or spiced for energy. You watch it eat and wonder who decided your stomach mattered less than an animal's legs. Even in terms of space, you lose. The stables offer the Lord's prize steed room to pace, stretch, lie down. You, on the other hand, hunch in the same room where you sleep, work, and try to stay warm without much light or ventilation. The air in your quarters smells of bodies, smoke, and mold. In the stables, it's fresh hay and the warm, earthy scent of an animal treated with respect. You see it blink at you with large, calm eyes, unaware of the injustice. Or maybe it knows. Maybe it's just polite enough not to gloat. And then there's attention. The Lord visits the stables daily. He runs a hand down the horse's flank, checks its hooves, speaks to it like it understands every word. When he walks past you in the corridor, he doesn't even glance your way. The beast is acknowledged. You are invisible. You shovel its dung while your own filth festers in a hole barely wide enough to squat over. If the horse is injured, there's alarm. If you are, there's replacement. Some nights when the wind cuts through the castle like a blade and you can't sleep for the pain in your joints, you imagine what it would be like to trade places, to have someone care if you eat, to be brushed and fed and warmed, to matter, not because of what you do, but simply because of what you are. But you're not a warhorse. You're just a body, replaceable, forgettable, and cold. The air inside the castle doesn't welcome you. It presses in with a damp heaviness that clings to your lungs and settles into your bones. The walls sweat in silence, massive slabs of stone that trap moisture like a sponge, especially in the lower levels where sunlight never touches. Mold blossoms in hidden corners, black and green and spreading like a sickness. It grows in the cracks between floorboards, in the tapestries meant to warm the room, and in the straw stuffed into your mattress. You don't see it at first, but your body does. Your nose runs, your throat scratches, your chest wheezes, and that's just the beginning. You try to sleep, but the air itself fights you. It smells of damp wool, of foot rot, of meals burned and forgotten. It carries the scent of centuries of breath and blood, soaked into the very stones. You lie still, inhaling decay with every breath, and when you cough, it echoes like a warning. You wonder if your lungs are blackening. You've heard of people choking to death in their sleep. Castle lung, some call it. No cure, no warning. Just years of breathing in rot until your breath runs out. The nobles have incense, of course. They burn rosemary, lavender, frankincense, anything to mask the reality. But you don't have that luxury. You have straw that reeks of mildew, clothes that never fully dry, and walls slick with condensation. Even the torches drip. And if you open a shutter to let air in, you let in the cold too. So you're stuck, choking in the dark, wet heat of a space that was never meant for human lungs. Down in the cellar, it's worse. The stores of grain and salted meat grow fur, and no one dares throw anything out. Waste is unthinkable. You scrape the mold off bread and pretend it's clean. You boil water that still tastes like rot. Even the wine goes sour in barrels sealed tight against the damp. You can't escape it. Mold is the invisible master of this place. It owns the rafters, the bedding, the food, the air. When the seasons change, the walls breathe with you. But what they exhale is never clean. You live in a slow rot, breathing it in and out like prayer. You don't notice how bad it is until you leave the castle, if you ever do. Until you stand on a hill one day, far away from the stone cage, and taste the wind, and realize that for years you weren't breathing air. You were breathing centuries of slow death. The marketplace fills long before the bread is sold. Children sit on shoulders, women jostle for a better view, and men elbow each other like it's a sport. Because today, the entertainment isn't a song or a story, it's a punishment. Public spectacle is the pulse of castle life, and nothing draws a crowd like someone else's suffering. The gallows aren't tucked away. They stand tall beside the chapel, as much a part of the landscape as the well or the bakehouse. And when the town crier announces a flogging or a hanging, you'd think he was inviting people to a feast. Everyone shows up, because in a world where joy is rare, pain becomes performance. The man at the center, maybe a thief, maybe just someone who crossed the wrong lord, doesn't get a name. He gets stripped, tied, and displayed. A living warning. The executioner, of course, plays the role with enthusiasm. He's not just an arm with an axe. He's an artist. His leather apron is stiff with dried blood, and his eyes scan the crowd as if daring anyone to flinch. The first lash lands loud, and the crowd reacts like it's theater. Some gasp, some cheer, some laugh. Children mimic the sound. Mothers hush them, but no one leaves. You watch, whether you want to or not. Not watching is suspicious. Not reacting is worse. This isn't justice, it's ritual, a reenactment of control. The pain on display reminds everyone who's in charge, who owns the law, who decides what qualifies as crime. The Lord might be watching from a window, sipping wine while his people squirm below. He sees the blood, but it doesn't move him. That's the point. It's not supposed to. Mercy is weakness, and weakness gets punished next. Sometimes the condemned screams. Sometimes they don't. But the silence doesn't help. Silence only drags things out. The executioner knows how to make it last. He's had practice. Years of swinging, cutting, branding, and breaking. He doesn't do it for revenge. He does it because it keeps him fed. Because the castle has no place for useless men. And he's found a job that never runs dry. If it's an execution day, it's even worse. The scaffold becomes a stage, the noose a prop. People pray, but not for the condemned. They pray for a good, clean show, quick, loud, satisfying. If the rope breaks or the blade misses, it's a disappointment. If the head rolls smoothly, it's a crowd pleaser. The blood seeps into the ground, and the earth drinks like it's been waiting. You leave with the taste of iron in your throat, unsure whether it's from what you saw or the fact that you didn't look away. And tomorrow, when the gallows stand empty, you'll walk by like they're just part of the scenery. Because in this world, they are. Entertainment isn't escape, it's reminder. And the only thing worse than being in the crowd is being on the platform. The bell tolls before the sun rises, and everyone stops what they're doing. You don't have a choice. The sound slices through the damp air, a long, low clang that echoes off the stone like a summons from something older than the church itself. You never know what the bell means, not right away. That's the worst part. It might be the call to morning prayers, or it might be the death bell. Same tone, same rhythm, same dread. You stand frozen, listening for a second chime, listening for crying, listening for anything that might tell you whether today begins with worship or a funeral. In a castle, bells are messengers, but they never bring good news. They ring for disease, for fire, for death. Sometimes they ring for war, though that one's sharper, faster, panicked, meant to get you moving. But this one is slow, measured, a heartbeat in stone, and it always makes you feel like someone just walked over your grave. Eventually, someone whispers, "The steward's wife lost her baby," or "The cook's son fell from the tower," or "A guard was found in the moat, mouth open, eyes still wide." That's when you know it's death. And that's when the crying begins. Not loud, not wailing, just a soft, broken weep that leaks from behind doorways and chapel pews. Then come the prayers. Not because they help, but because it's all you can do. You kneel in the cold chapel, the bell still echoing in your ears, while the priest chants Latin you barely understand. You don't need translation. You know what's being said. It's the same thing every time. Lord, take this soul. Lord, have mercy. Lord, remind the living that death never waits. The air smells like wax and mildew and mourning. You keep your head bowed and your hands folded, even though you're thinking of your own family, your own skin, your own luck, or lack of it. Sometimes the bell rings twice in one day. Once for death, and again for prayer. Or maybe they're the same thing. Maybe they always were. Because in a place like this, where the line between life and suffering is razor thin, you learn that the only difference between a funeral and a sermon is how many candles get lit. You walk back to your work, shaken but pretending not to be. The bell fades, but it lingers in your bones. You try not to think about when it'll ring for you, because it will, eventually. Everyone hears the bell for them. The only question is whether you'll know why it's ringing, or if you'll already be cold before the sound even reaches your ears. In a medieval castle, pain doesn't end. It changes form. A twisted ankle becomes a limp you carry for life. A kitchen burn becomes a shiny patch of scarred flesh that never stops stinging when it rains. Every injury writes itself onto your body like a cruel scribe with a hot iron pen. There's no concept of recovery, not really. There are no hospitals, no physical therapy, no prescriptions or clean gauze. You don't heal, you adapt. You limp, you favor one side. You find new ways to carry a pail or lift a tool. But the wound never quite vanishes. It just becomes part of how you move through the world. A bruise doesn't fade. It turns yellow, then purple, then black. And just as it disappears, another takes its place. Your hands are never uncut. Blisters from hauling wood pop and reopen before they can close. Fingernails break, dirt grinds into your knuckles, and skin splits from cold before calluses can form. You wear your injuries like armor, useless against real harm, but proof that you've survived it once before. Maybe that's enough. If you break a bone, your choices are cruelly simple. Splint it with whatever's nearby and hope for a miracle. Or pray it's your time to die. There's no surgeon waiting. Maybe the village blacksmith will try to straighten the limb if he's brave. And you're desperate. But alignment is a guess, and the pain is forever. A poorly set leg means you'll drag it behind you for the rest of your life, wincing every time the weather changes or stairs appear. You get used to it. You have to, because no one else is stopping to help. Scars are conversation here. Someone points to the jagged line across your arm and asks, "Kitchen knife or pitchfork?" They nod when you answer. Everyone understands. They've got their own collection. A notch under the eye, a collapsed finger, a shoulder that clicks when it moves. No one is whole. That's not what bodies are for. They're tools. When they break, you don't replace them. You work around them. Even illnesses leave their mark. A fever takes your hearing. An infection steals a toe. A cough never leaves. You don't rest to get better. You rest so you can walk again tomorrow. The only healing is time, and time just teaches you how to live with pain instead of resisting it. There's a quiet grief in that, a quiet resilience too. Because when everything hurts and nothing heals, the fact that you keep going anyway starts to look like something holy, or maybe just stubborn. Either way, the castle doesn't care. The walls are indifferent to your aches. The stone keeps being stone, and you keep being scarred. That's how it works. That's how you survive. You wake up before the sun, every day, without fail. Your hands are raw from scrubbing rush-covered floors, your back aches from hauling water up narrow stone steps, and your stomach growls for a meal you'll never eat hot. But no one will ever know your name. There's no plaque with your deeds carved into it, no family crest, no painted portrait hung in the Great Hall. You're the one who lights the torches before the Lord dines, who sweeps the soot after the fire dies, who shovels the waste from the privy chute, and yet history will call you nothing. The chroniclers didn't write about you. They inked the exploits of knights and lords, the birth of heirs, the death of kings. But you scrubbed their blood off the courtyard stones and washed their linens when the plague hit. When the scribe put quill to parchment, he skipped your story because it wasn't noble. It wasn't grand. It was just survival. You're the shadow that keeps the castle running. The invisible hands that make the bed, sharpen the blade, stir the stew, and carry the wounded after battle. The work is endless and thankless. When you die, and you will, young, exhausted, likely from something preventable, your grave might not even be marked. A pile of stones, if you're lucky. Maybe someone will mutter your name for a week, but it will fade, just like you. Your labor feeds a machine that doesn't care. The Lord might not know your face. The lady might not even look at you. The steward knows your worth only by how quickly you finish the task. You could collapse from fever and someone would drag you out of the way, not to help, but so your body doesn't get in the path of the day's work. There is no legacy for you here. No songs, no tales, no lineage. You are one in a long, silent line of broken backs and chapped hands, of servants who rose in the dark and died without fanfare. And the most brutal part? You know this. You know it every time you pass the Hall of Tapestries, each one dripping with stories of people who never carried a chamber pot or cleaned vomit off the stone floor after a noble's feast. Those tapestries lie. They show a world of triumph and grace. You are the missing thread, snapped and forgotten. But in the quiet moments, when the sun comes through a slit window just right, you think about what it means to endure anyway. Maybe history won't remember you, but the castle does. Every stone you scrubbed, every fire you lit, every wound you treated, they remember. And maybe, just maybe, that's something. You learn quickly that silence isn't privacy. In a castle, the walls aren't just stone, they're memory. Every whisper you speak in a hallway could echo into a punishment. Every look you give the wrong noble at the wrong time could land you in the stocks, or worse. There's no such thing as a secret here, not really. The servants' quarters may be cramped and dim, but there's always someone listening, usually someone with a reason to repeat what they hear. Loose lips don't just sink ships. In a castle, they end livelihoods. You think you're alone as you mutter complaints while scrubbing a corridor, but then the steward corners you later, eyebrows raised, voice low, repeating your exact words back to you. Maybe a maid overheard and traded your grievance for favor. Maybe a page caught your expression and passed it on. Maybe someone behind a tapestry heard everything. Because yes, those woven decorations are beautiful, but they also hide alcoves. And alcoves are perfect for listening. It doesn't matter if you're noble or peasant. Intrigue is everyone's business. The higher up you are, the sharper the knives behind the curtain. But even if you're at the bottom, just a cook's assistant or a chambermaid, your misstep might become someone else's leverage. A glance between lovers, a murmured insult, a suspicion about someone's loyalties. These things get picked up, passed around, stretched into stories, then used like weapons. Eavesdropping is a sport in the castle, and it pays well, if not in coin, then in survival. Everyone wants to be the one with a secret, the one who knows something first. Gossip is currency, traded with the careful touch of a dagger's point. And when it gets back to the wrong person, you don't get to defend yourself. You don't get a trial. You just get a punishment. Some castles even have designed spy corridors, thin walkways built between walls, so a lord's guards could hear every conversation in the great hall. But even if yours doesn't, the effect is the same. The guard standing still in the corner isn't daydreaming. The steward walking past you twice in 5 minutes isn't just forgetful. You are being watched. You are being heard. And worse, you never know who's next in line to betray you for favor, out of fear or ambition. So you learn. You speak in riddles. You nod instead of agreeing. You never say anything near a wall. Because in a castle, there are no secrets, only ticking time bombs disguised as silence. You don't get to dream for yourself. not in a medieval castle. Your thoughts, your plans, your hopes for something different are smothered under duty. From the moment you can carry a tray or sweep a floor, your path is carved out by someone else's convenience. If you're a servant, your time isn't yours, your body isn't yours. You wake when you're told, wear what you're given, and sleep only when there's no more work left to do. You exist to fulfill the needs, moods, and appetites of people who see you as nothing more than background, like a tapestry that moves. If you're born noble, it's not better, it's colder. Your life is arranged like furniture in a hall, placed strategically for appearances, alliances, and gain. Your marriage will be decided before you understand what love even is. You may be sent off at 15 to wed a man twice your age, to live in a different castle with different rules, serving a new family's ambitions. Your womb becomes property, your signature a political tool. And if you're a younger son, you're sent to war or the church. No choice, no voice. Dreams are dangerous here. Wanting more than your place can look like arrogance. Reaching for something that isn't yours invites punishment, or worse, notice. And being noticed in a castle is rarely good. It means someone's watching, and someone powerful has just remembered your name, which means they might soon erase it. You learn to let your ambitions die quietly, or bury them under silence and endurance. Even the artists, scribes, or entertainers, those who come close to shaping beauty, don't get to create freely. They flatter the Lord. They reflect his triumphs. They paint what's commissioned, not what moves them. The songs must honor, the words must serve, the images must praise. Originality is not rewarded. Obedience is. Sometimes, when the fire has burned low and the castle is quiet, you might find yourself staring at the rafters, letting your mind wander to another life. Maybe a forest, maybe a field far from stone walls and protocol. Maybe you imagine owning land, choosing love, writing your own story. But then morning comes and you're woken by shouting, cold air, and another day not your own. You rise, not because you want to, but because you must. You bow, you carry, you nod, because your dreams aren't yours. They belong to someone richer, someone louder, someone who has the power to crush them before you even speak them aloud. Words can ruin you in a castle. A careless joke, a whispered complaint, or even an innocent truth said too loudly can turn a quiet day into your last. This isn't a place where freedom of speech is a noble right. It's a liability. Every sentence you utter might reach ears you didn't see, and those ears often belong to someone with power, or someone eager to win favor by repeating what you said with just enough twist to get you in trouble. So you learn fast. Silence isn't cowardice, it's armor. In the echoing halls of a stone fortress, your voice travels farther than you think. Gossip is currency, and betrayal is a shortcut to advancement. The kitchen boy might pass your words to the cook, who speaks to the steward, who casually mentions them to the chamberlain, until somehow your passing frustration ends up in the Lord's ear. And he doesn't need a reason to punish you. Your discomfort is enough. Your existence is enough. All it takes is a look, a nod, and you're scrubbing privies instead of floors. Or worse, you're simply gone. Everyone watches, but no one speaks freely. You learn to keep your tone flat, your answers short. Yes, my lord. At once, my lady. You never offer thoughts. You never question orders. Even among supposed friends, you tread carefully, because in the castle, alliances shift with the wind. Yesterday's friend could be today's spy if it keeps them out of trouble or puts them in the noble's good graces. Confiding in someone feels like placing your neck in their hands. Most aren't strong enough not to squeeze. Even laughter can be dangerous. Laugh at the wrong time or too loudly, and it might be mistaken for mockery. Be silent when a lord expects amusement, and you're seen as cold or defiant. There's no winning, only surviving. So you wear a mask. Neutral, obedient, invisible. And you make your thoughts your own private treasure, locked away where no eyes or ears can reach them. Some say that silence makes you a ghost. They're wrong. It makes you real in the only way that matters here. It keeps you in motion, keeps you working, keeps you breathing. Because in a place where power sits on every stair and cruelty is wrapped in silk and smiles, the less you say, the safer you are. Opinions are for the rich, the reckless, or the soon-to-be dead. For the rest of us, silence is survival. In a medieval castle, beauty isn't something you enjoy. It's something that's used against you. A pretty face turns heads, but not in admiration. In the eyes of power, beauty is a resource, a currency, a possession to be bartered, controlled, or stolen. If you're beautiful, you're a target, not for love, but for leverage. Your face could seal a marriage deal. Your body could smooth over a feud. And your opinions? They don't matter. Not when your appearance can speak louder, more profitably than your voice ever could. You don't get to choose who notices you. And once you're noticed, you don't get to vanish. The Lord might smile at you one day and expect you in his chambers the next. Refusal isn't bravery. It's danger. A noble's desire can ruin your life faster than a sword. You'll be flattered in public, pressured in private, and blamed entirely when things fall apart. If you give in, you're sullied. If you resist, you're troublesome. Either way, your reputation burns. Even among your own, beauty breeds resentment. Other servants don't see your fear. They see favoritism. They see the glances, the soft orders, the stolen treats passed your way. They don't see the dread in your chest every time a hand lingers too long or a door closes behind you. They don't hear what's whispered, what's promised, what's threatened. They only see the surface, and that surface makes enemies. Your safety becomes a performance. You try to dull your glow, wear dirtier clothes, speak less, lower your gaze. You make yourself small, unremarkable. You hope it works. Sometimes it doesn't. And for noble women, it's no easier. You may wear silk, but your choices are shackles. You're paraded like a trophy, dressed to impress a suitor you didn't ask for. Your worth is pinned to your waistline, your skin, your womb. They marry your beauty, not your mind. And after the wedding, they claim both anyway. There's no hiding, only deflecting. You learn which corridors are safe, which smiles are safe. You walk with others. You never linger. You never trust. Because in a castle, being beautiful isn't a blessing. It's a warning, a countdown, a snare. And if you're lucky, you'll age quickly. If you're lucky, you'll lose the thing that makes people want to own you. Then, maybe, you'll just be invisible enough to survive. The dead don't stay quiet in a medieval castle. They linger beneath the floors, behind chapel walls, and sometimes right beneath your feet as you sleep. You don't need to visit a graveyard. You live in one. Crypts sit beneath chapels. Tombs line corridors. Bones are stacked in vaults, covered with dust and prayers that have long lost their power. And if you serve in the castle, you pass them daily, on your way to fetch water, sweep the hall, or deliver a tray of food to someone more alive than you'll ever feel. Every step echoes through layers of time. That cold stone beneath your soles, it hides centuries of sorrow. Lords, ladies, children, and warriors, all buried in sanctified silence, yet still present. Their presence clings to the air, thick and ancient. You feel it most at night when the wind groans through arrow slits and the temperature drops like breath leaving a corpse. The walls don't just hold history, they hold death, and death seeps into everything. The smell doesn't always go. Old rot, damp cloth, incense masking something worse. Even after burial, the dead linger in scent and memory. Priests chant over coffins. Nobles light candles for their lineage. But you, the one who carries the body or scrubs the floor beneath it, you're the one who knows the truth. The soul may rise, but the body stays. And sometimes, when the ground floods or repairs dig too deep, the past resurfaces, literally. A jawbone unearthed, a femur sticking out from a cracked stone tile, and always silence afterward. No one wants to speak of the dead who refuse to leave. Superstition thrives in this world. People believe the restless dead can reach up from the soil, whisper in dreams, spoil the milk, twist a newborn's limbs. You might scoff at first, until you spend a week in a room above an old burial vault and feel the cold that never leaves your spine. Or until a servant dies of fever and their bed isn't changed for days, just in case their spirit is waiting to see who lies down next. You don't get used to it. You just stop reacting. You walk past the chapel crypt and avert your eyes. You light candles without asking why. You mumble half-remembered prayers, not because you believe, but because not doing so feels worse. And when you sleep, you wonder how many others slept in that straw before you. How many never got up? How many still whisper, somewhere just below? In a medieval castle, the living and the dead share the same address. Only the temperature is different. And even that changes in winter. You don't pray for a miracle. You don't even pray for relief. You pray for death to wait, to stand at the edge of the room and be patient. Let you sweep the last corner of the hall. Let you carry this bucket up the stairs without slipping. Let you eat one more crust of bread, stale as it is. That's what prayer becomes in a medieval castle, a whispered plea, not for salvation, but for delay. You know death. You've seen it in the eyes of your neighbor after fever took her child. You've smelled it when the rats dragged something under the stairs. You've heard it in the middle of the night, when a cough turns wet and then goes silent. Death is not dramatic here. It doesn't come with a storm or battle cry. It slips in with the draft under the door. It rides in the breath of the cook, or in the blood of a scraped knee. It is quiet, patient, unblinking. You learn to work with it. You nod when the priest says a name you barely knew. You help dig the pit with your hands numb from cold. You lower the bundle in without looking. You say nothing when someone doesn't show up for their chores the next day, because asking means admitting, and admitting means fearing. So you don't ask. You just keep moving, hoping death is still busy elsewhere. The worst part is how ordinary it becomes. You don't scream when the old man collapses in the courtyard. You just make way for the wheelbarrow. You don't flinch when the bell tolls in the chapel. You just wonder who's next. You never assume it isn't you. You stop planning. You start enduring. One chore, 1 hour, one frostbitten morning at a time. And yet, you still pray, not to be saved, but to have a little more time to see the sunrise, to feel the warmth of the oven, even if it's smoke-choked and burning your hands, to hear someone laugh in the corridor, even if the laugh is cruel. You cling to those scraps. You treasure them because they're real, because they mean death hasn't picked you today. But tomorrow, That's up to the wind, or the rats, or the Lord's temper, or a stone step too slick with moss. You don't pray for death to leave. That would be foolish. You just pray it stays at the far end of the room, silent and still, for one more hour. Maybe two. Just enough to feel like living still counts for something. The castle stands long after your bones have turned to dust. Its walls outlive your name, your pain, your brief, flickering existence. Every step you take leaves no mark. Every burden you carry becomes invisible the moment it's lifted. But the stones, those cold, carved stones, they remember. They don't forget the way your back bent beneath firewood, or how your fingers bled, scrubbing their surface smooth. You are not history. You are what holds history up. There is no plaque for the woman who died delivering her third child behind a drafty curtain. No song for the kitchen boy who slipped with a pot of boiling stew. No tale for the old man who froze in his sleep 3 winters ago. Their stories are not passed down. They are swallowed by the castle, buried beneath the chapel floor, or scraped clean by time. And yet, the stones remain. They hold the memory without words. The grooves in the stairs where countless feet stumbled, the smoke stains on the hearth where generations of suffering cooked another rotten meal. You don't carve your story. You etch it in routine, in silence, in aching limbs and unspoken dread. And even then, you know it won't last. When a lord's name fades from favor, his crest is chipped away. When a tower crumbles, its stones are repurposed for another master's hall. There's no permanence here, not even for the rich. But the pain that built this place, it echoes. They'll tell future generations this was a place of grandeur. They'll paint it in warm candlelight with feasts and tapestries and romance. They'll forget that 100 nameless hands froze, starved, and broke to make those walls stand straight. They'll forget you, but the castle won't. Its silence is not ignorance, it's endurance. And so you press on, day after day, a ghost in your own time. You sweep where no one sees. You listen where no one speaks. You endure in a place that does not thank you, does not know you, and will not mourn you. Because that's what life is in a medieval castle. Not glory, not legend, not belonging. Just stone, blood, and memory. And none of them are yours to keep. So welcome home. The door is cold, the roof leaks, the halls echo with footsteps no one will trace. But it stands, and so do you. For now.